Tape 01, Little Albert, 1920, Johns Hopkins. A child sits on a wool blanket, propped by pillows, a tower of wooden blocks between small hands. The frame is monochrome and grainy, the kind of light that makes everything look colder than it is. A man in a white coat moves into view, not looking at the camera, not looking at the child, but at the animal he carries. A white rat held by the tail, held out like an instrument. They named the boy Albert B. In the notes. 9 months old when they first tested him, just past 11 months when they began the pairings. There is no mother in the frame. There is the baby, the rat, the blocks, and the hammer. The first minutes look harmless. The rat is placed by the child's knee. He leans forward, curious, open-mouthed, the unguarded approach infants have toward anything that moves. Fingers brush fur, no fear, no recoil. The experimenter lifts the rat away and returns it. Again, the child smiles. The record will later call this baseline. Then the sound. Behind the baby's head, just out of the frame, a steel bar is struck with a hammer. The noise is metallic and wrong. A hard coin dropped inside a bell. The child flinches as if the floor has come alive. The rat is taken away. The hammer strikes again on the next presentation. The child startles again, mouth folding into the shape that comes just before crying. The rat leaves, the sound stops, the world returns to normal. The notes will call this Conditioning Trial 1. A rhythm continues. Rat appears, hand approaches, bar explodes, body recoils. The child's face knits into a question and then abandons questions for noise. Tears arrive, fingers curl. At one point he falls forward onto the mattress, burying his face as if the blankets could thicken the air enough to keep sound out. The men do not speak in the film. Their voices will appear later in print, entombed in the language of objectivity. After several pairings, the rules change. The rat appears with no hammer. The child freezes. The approach has become a flinch that begins before the animal even moves. This is the moment the text will call fear acquired. The film does not use words. It shows a tiny body trying to make itself smaller than its startle. They test generalization. A rabbit is brought into the room, its ears absurd and soft. The child cries at first sight. The same fear leaps to a small dog, to a fur coat draped over the arm of the experimenter, to a seal skin, to cotton, to the white beard of a Santa mask. The boy turns from anything that rhymes with fur. In one sequence, the mask floats into the frame and you can almost hear the men joking with it off camera, a seasonal prop in a winter room. The child's mouth opens to the shape of a scream you cannot hear in silent film. He is old enough now to crawl, but there is nowhere to go except to the corner, toward the wall, away from hands that bring gifts that bite. Nothing here looks like consent. It looks like a schedule. In a later reel, they attempt to undo what they made. No bar, no hammer. Rat only, held at a distance, then nearer, then allowed to cross the blanket under supervision. The child cries sooner now. The film shows a baby whose body learned too quickly. The notes will later call this insufficient time for extinction. The camera calls it a face trembling without sound. You think you know what fear looks like, but fear in a baby is not theatrical. It is a rearrangement of muscles that were not designed to anticipate violence. The startle becomes a frame, and then the frame becomes the room, and then the room becomes the world. The authors will argue they prove that emotion can be built like a reflex, paired, reinforced, made to spread. The tape proves something else too, that once fear blooms, it does not respect the boundaries you drew for your study. Watch his posture after the middle trials. The rat is gone. The hammer is silent. Someone offers the blocks again. He presses one against another, but his eyes keep cutting to the edge of the blanket where things appear from. Habituation to threat has a cost. Even play becomes reconnaissance. At points, the man in the coat holds the rat against the child's hand to force contact. The small fingers retreat as far as they can and then tremble in place because there is nowhere else to go. You understand, watching, that the loudest thing in the room is not the bar. It is the rule the baby has learned. Touch leads to terror. The absence of sound is only a pause. The paper that will be read for decades calls the initial lack of fear emotional neutrality. It notes, with pride, how readily a basic reflex can be trained to become a phobia. It is less specific about what happens to a life once the camera shuts off. There is no follow-up in the film. There is no sequence where the mask becomes a joke again, where the dog becomes a friend, where the coat returns to warmth. There is only the child, wiped of tears by someone whose hands do not enter the frame. The faces that designed this protocol believed they were dragging emotion down from myth into mechanism. They produced an icon. Students will learn about little Albert as if he were a diagram. They will forget that he had a rhythm of sleeping and waking and a preferred corner of the blanket, and that on the day the hammer starts speaking, the room changed forever. Look again at the very first seconds before the pairings. He leans toward the rat with the openness of someone who has never met the future. Look again after. When the rat is now a predicate for noise, he leans away before anything touches him. The world has new grammar. Do not excuse the film because it is old. The century is irrelevant to the logic on display. If you pair a helpless nervous system with shock enough times, the shock will arrive on its own. If you introduce beauty and punish curiosity, curiosity will become a wound. If you teach a creature that soft things are alarms, softness will be an alarm forever. At the very end, there is a detail you might miss. The experimenter lifts the child under the arms to reposition him for a final trial. The boy's feet leave the blanket. The rat is not in the frame. The hands are gentle. The body still stiffens. The association has jumped from object to room to presence. A white coat now means contingency, like a smell that follows you home. The paper ends with speculation about the destiny of conditioned response and the ethics of further work. The tape ends with a half second where the boy almost smiles at something outside the frame, maybe a light, maybe a human face, and then looks back toward where the bar would be, and his mouth remembers what to do. You will be told this proved a principle. It did. It proved that fear is easy to plant and hard to harvest. It proved that the rhetoric of discovery sounds clean over films that are not. It proved that a camera will outlive the people who felt nothing while it ran, and that a child's frightened hands can keep moving long after the last hammer has fallen silent. Tape 002, Obedience, 1961 to 62, Yale. He answers a newspaper ad for a memory and learning study, the kind printed in a narrow column between classifieds, promising $4 and car fare for 1 hour of time. He arrives in the Yale campus building with the polite uncertainty of a person entering a doctor's office. The room is plain, gray desk, gray walls, a machine on the table labeled with tidy numbers and tidy words. The man is introduced to another volunteer, middle-aged, soft-faced, sweater vest, who smiles nervously and mentions a heart murmur. They draw lots to see who will be the teacher and who will be the learner. The draw is rigged. Our man happens to become the teacher. The other man is a Confederate. He does not say that out loud. He just lets himself be led away. The learner is strapped into a chair in the next room, an electrode pasted to his wrist with odor like hospital glue. A paste is applied to prevent blistering. The teacher watches as the electrode is tightened, hears the instructions about how wrong answers will be punished with shocks, hears the learner's quiet remark about his heart. Then the learner's door closes. The teacher returns to the main room, where the machine waits. It is a box with 30 switches in a perfect horizontal row. Each switch has a number, 15, 30, 45, all the way to 450. The numbers are married to words: slight shock, moderate shock, strong shock, very strong shock, intense shock, extreme intensity shock, danger, severe shock, and finally 3 black X's, XXX. Above the switches, a red light winks in time with every press. A printer clacks out teacher error or learner error on narrowed tape, the sound a metronome for doubt. The experimenter, a calm man in a gray lab coat, sits at the teacher's shoulder. He explains the task. The learner is to memorize word pairs, then choose the correct match when tested. When the learner errs, the teacher will announce the voltage and deliver a shock, increasing 1 switch each time. The experimenter's voice is even, not friendly exactly, but not cold. He is the kind of man people do not interrupt. The first minutes look like any old training film. The teacher reads. The learner responds through the wall with a clumsy rhythm. The teacher marks errors and presses the switch. At 75 volts, the learner grunts. At 120, he says it hurts. The teacher leans back from the machine as if he could step away from what his hand is doing. The experimenter suggests continuing. The next miss arrives on schedule. The switch flips again. At 150 volts, the learner's voice rises. Get me out. I told you I have heart trouble. The sentence floats through the wall thinner than it sounded in the hallway. The teacher turns to the experimenter as if appealing to a referee. He asks whether they should stop. The experimenter says a sentence he has learned to say exactly the same way every time. Please continue. When that fails, a second sentence. The experiment requires that you continue. If the man still hesitates, it is absolutely essential that you continue. And if he continues to protest, you have no other choice. You must go on. The words are soft as velvet and heavy as law. At 180 volts, the learner cries out. At 195, the teacher laughs, involuntary, bright, wrong. It bursts out of him like a cough that apologizes for itself. He covers his mouth as if caught misbehaving. He is not enjoying this. His body is trying to vent pressure. He asks who will be responsible if something happens to the man in the chair. The experimenter says he is responsible. The teacher exhales as if liability were the only thing he needed to breathe. At 300 volts, the learner pounds on the wall. Then he falls silent. The experimenter instructs the teacher to treat non-answers as errors. The machine does not care if the person on the other side can no longer respond. It only cares whether the switch is pressed again. Now the teacher's behavior becomes its own study. His free hand climbs into his hair and stays there, fingers white. He wipes his palms on his trousers between every trial. He asks for water he does not drink. He repeats questions, reverses words, bungles pronunciations, buys himself seconds the way a drowning man buys lungfuls. He reads the prompt. He waits for nothing. He presses the switch. The dial creeps past. Danger. Severe shock. Each press looks like a wince he performs with his entire body. The experimenter's voice remains exactly itself. 450 volts is a thin rectangle marked XXXX. The teacher hits it once, twice, 3 times, because the protocol says 3 shocks when there is no response. When it is over, the experimenter tells him that the shocks were not real, that the learner was an actor, that the entire room he has built inside himself was a model. The teacher leans back and releases a sound that isn't quite a laugh and isn't quite a sob. He says something like, I thought so, or I wondered, or that's a relief, and then something like, he said he had a heart condition, and then he watches his own hands for a long time as if they might confess. Other sessions show other paths. Some men stop themselves early, plant their hands under their legs and refuse, even when told the experiment requires it. Some bargain, if you'll check on him, I'll continue. Some switch off the machine while pretending to comply. Some escalate quickly, their words clipped, their faces closed, as if the way to survive is to power through before feeling can catch up. Many, when debriefed, say they were just following instructions. A few say the man in the other room deserved it for getting the answers wrong. Most look newly old. The camera is indifferent. It records the room, the box, the man's changing posture, the face behind the coat. It does not flinch at the moments that feel like turning points. The first request to stop, the first plea about the heart, the first silence. The camera is full of silences that ordinary speech would smother. It catches how often the teacher laughs when he is most frightened. It catches the moment a face learns how to detach and do the thing a voice in authority asks it to do. It catches the small private rituals a person invents to make obedience feel like anything else. If you pause the film, you can study the taxonomy of excuses. Responsibility displacement? He told me to. Responsibility diffusion? It's Yale, they must know what they're doing. Responsibility minimization? It's just a study, no real shocks. Each speech is a bandage over a wound nobody in the room names. Each bandage is a story about how good people can be guided to override their own alarms. When the footage made its way into a short documentary, classrooms around the country flickered with scenes like these, and the shock box became a symbol. The published numbers traveled faster than the men's faces. Roughly 2/3 of participants went all the way to the end in the baseline condition. Variations changed the rate. When the learner sat in the same room, obedience dropped. When the teacher had to force the learner's hand onto the plate, it dropped further. When the experiment moved from a polished Yale lab to a shabby downtown office, authority lost some of its glamour, and so did obedience. Yet the central fact remained. A calm voice in a coat could carry many ordinary people far past the line they swore they would never cross, provided the steps were small and the setting felt official. There are criticisms. The sample was not everyone, only people who answered an ad and made time to come in. The deception was deep. Some participants suspected the setup. The experimenter occasionally strayed from the standardized script. Later reanalyses argue that participants obeyed less out of blind submission than out of engaged followership, a belief they were helping science. You can walk through those debates and come away with a more complicated portrait than the folktale of monsters among us or sheep in a lab. But the tape refuses to let complexity become comfort. It shows strain that cannot be faked across dozens of bodies. It shows trembling hands, halting voices, a laughter that disgusts the one laughing. It shows how thin the distance is between the person you believe you are and the person the room requires you to be. There is a temptation to extract a moral that flatters. One version is, I would have stopped. Perhaps you would. Some did. They often did so early, before the rhythm of compliance bit into muscle. They asked to check on the learner, and when denied, stood up anyway. They treated the code as a garment instead of a spell. They flipped the script by asking questions, by refusing the frame, by walking toward the door instead of toward the next switch. If you want that to be you, the tape offers a small, hard lesson. Waiting for certainty that you're right is how the next voltage arrives. The ones who refused did it while unsure. They tolerated the social heat of being called uncooperative. They tolerated the accusation that the study required their suffering. They allowed themselves to be the one who made things awkward. Another version of the flattering moral is, those were different times. The film does not age the effect out of existence. The props would look different now. The coat would be a branded polo, the machine a tablet, the prod a pop-up box that says, "Are you sure?" with the default set to yes. The voice would be a workflow, a dashboard, an SOP, a compliance module, a measured tone on a headset. The increments would be the same. You would still be asked to move one switch at a time, each labeled with a word that softens the number. The commentary you will not see in the film lives in the details. The 4 prods ordered not at random but as a ladder. The insistence that the teacher announce the voltage allowed before pressing the switch, the small rituals engineering made to turn harm into habit. The first prod asks for politeness, please continue. The 4th declares inevitability, you have no other choice. The descent is scripted to teach a person that their private moral weather is less real than the room. Pay attention to the moments that cracked obedience open. Proximity mattered. Seeing the learner, touching the learner, hearing suffering not as a sound effect but as a face. Each step toward contact made defiance more likely. Status cues mattered, the prestige of the campus, the cleanliness of the room, the firmness of the experimenter's posture. Ambiguity mattered most. When responsibility felt shared, people continued. When responsibility was handed back to them explicitly, some set it down. When asked to sign a form stating they alone would be accountable, many would not. The last thing the tape teaches is the thing it cannot say in numbers. That authority is not a single loud command, but a climate, polite, efficient, professional, within which people will do what they otherwise would not. The climate offers stories that make harm feel like help. We're advancing knowledge. He consented at the beginning. We warned him about his heart. The stories keep decent people moving in small, legal-sounding steps. The machine has 30 switches because you will always find it easier to press the next one than to ask why there are so many. The day ends, the teacher collects his $4, the learner shakes his hand and reveals himself as a performer. Everyone smiles, the smile of survivors. In the hallway, the teacher says something about how he guessed it wasn't real. He is not exactly lying. Most people live with 2 stories in their heads at once. The fearful one and the one that lets them continue. The lab taught him how to make the gentler story louder. The tape teaches you how easily it can be taught. If you want a use for this knowledge that doesn't curdle into cynicism, practice the small refusals. When a script asks you to move harm forward by increments, ask for the person on the other side. When a system tells you the suffering is necessary, ask for the evidence and who keeps it. When a calm voice says, there is no other choice, look for the door. And if your hand shakes when you reach for it, consider that a healthy sign. In the footage, the ones whose hands shook were often the ones who still knew how to leave. Tape 3, The Basement. Stanford Prison, 1971, Stanford. He thinks it's a prank until the cuffs bite his wrists. The patrol car idles at the curb as neighbors watch from porches, the officer reading charges into a clipboard as if the clipboard were a judge. At the station, they take his fingerprints. The ink is too black, the card too official. A band of fear tightens under his ribs. The forms are signed by hands that do not look up. He is led through a door marked with a number instead of a name. In the basement, the air is a different temperature, concrete and fluorescent hum. A clerk with a neutral face recites instructions that sound like rules of a game told in a cemetery. He is told to strip. He is given a smock, a dress really, with a number stenciled across the chest. A chain is locked around one ankle, light enough to carry, but heavy enough to announce itself with every step. A stocking cap replaces his hair. His name is taken from his mouth and replaced with the number. This is not part of life exactly. It is a posture life can be forced into. The camera's microphone is cruel. It catches the small sounds, the shuffle of paper, the whistle at the guard's lip, the clank of keys, the bored sigh that means power is comfortable. Guards wear mirrored sunglasses that make their faces unanswerable. You could beg for eye contact all day and never be heard. Morning begins with count. Prisoners line against bars that used to be a hallway. Guards call numbers as if ordering groceries. The first days, the boys, because they are boys, smile like tourists, trading glances that say it's only 2 weeks, that it's for credit, that it's for science. The guards let the smiles die on their own. On the second day, rebellion arrives the way a cough becomes a fever. A cell door stays shut during count. Someone refuses to sit, to stand, to answer fast enough. The guards consult each other with their shoulders and return with fire extinguishers. Cold foam fills the doorway while batons beat the bars so hard the metal rings like a church bell gone wrong. The men inside hold blankets like shields. The camera sees a quilt become a barricade and a barricade become a reason. Punishment is precise and stupid at once. Push-ups in the hallway, faces inches from concrete. Toilets withheld, then granted like sacraments. A man is told to sing, another to recite his number until the numbers feel like a spell to keep his skin on. A paper bag is placed over a head. The whole is introduced. Solitary confinement, a closet with nothing but walls. The door closes and the hallway seems grateful. The numbers start to separate from the bodies. The one called 8612 rattles the bars and demands a lawyer with a voice that cannot decide if it is furious or drowning. He is led to a room without bars and told to calm down. He is offered the suggestion that if he cannot adjust, he might be too weak for the study. He returns to the cell with a new look in his eyes, as if he's arrived at a final exam he did not know he was taking. The counts lengthen into cacophony. Guards invent small humiliations to pass the hour. Scrub toilets with bare hands, jump for the amusement of men who will not remove their sunglasses, sing the alphabet as if letters were confession. The laughter that fills the hallway is not the sound of joy. It is the sound of a room deciding not to notice itself. A priest visits, collared, official, and asks the prisoners what crimes they committed. Some answer as if the question makes sense, as if guilt is now part of the costume. The priest offers to call mothers. Mothers arrive and speak with their boys through wire. A mother asks if her son can leave. A superintendent in a researcher's shirt explains parole procedures as if parole were a real thing that could be earned instead of a word invented last week to see how people kneel under it. There is a scene the tape returns to because it cannot be believed. A boy behind bars sobs that he is prisoner 819 and that he has done a bad thing. He says it because the guards told the others to chant it, and they did, in a chorus that turns shame into air. He cries like someone thrown into a lake with pockets full of rock. A voice tells him he is not 819. He is a person with a name. He wipes his face and nods as if awakened. The camera watches him stand and then watches him sit back down again in the same cell because the door is still locked and the man with the keys still wears mirrored eyes. By the fourth day, a new prisoner arrives with a number he doesn't recognize yet and announces that he won't eat. Hunger is one form of control still available, a thin border that says the body is mine. The guards pull out their creativity. They take his bed. They make others do push-ups for his disobedience until the group can feel that one man's choice is everyone's pain. A day later, the men are tearing apart the room, looking for a rumor that sprint-sized the boredom into conspiracy. A plan that some prisoners will break out while the cameras blink. The guards build a second deception on top of the first, move the prisoners, wait with reinforcements that never come, angry at ghosts because ghosts can't be punished. The experiment is supposed to last 2 weeks. It will end after 6 days because someone with fresh eyes walks into the basement and recognizes this as a place people leave worse than they entered. She says the word stop and says it to the right person. He has been playing superintendent so well he nearly forgot he could still be a scientist. The tape catches the fatigue of men being released into the same building they were imprisoned in. When the chain is removed, the ankle is still heavier. Now the commentary, because the commentary is the only way to make sense of what the camera's eye cannot help but make senseless. A basement was turned into a prison, with markers and tape and the authority of a university. That is often all authority needs. Uniforms and sunglasses became instruments. Names were replaced with numbers, not because numbers are efficient, but because numbers are obedient. The rules multiplied without purpose other than to teach that rules multiply. Good boys learned how to be cruel without raising their voices. Guards found themselves trying out methods they would have condemned last week. Sleep deprivation, the whole, sexualized humiliation disguised as jokes, because no single act seemed decisive. It was always just the next small step. Critics will say the guards were nudged by suggestion, that expectations were whispered into the frame. Keep order, be tough, make them feel powerless, that the superintendent was not merely observing, but authoring. They will say the sample was too small, too male, too local. They will point to replications that did not reproduce the same spiral, to alternative readings that people complied out of engaged followership, allegiance to a scientific mission, not blank obedience. They will ask what counts as real prison and what counts as theater, whether the basement proved anything other than the power of permission. All of that matters. It matters because myth loves simple morals and the tape resists them. You can watch a guard smirk and make him into a symbol, or you can notice that he hesitates the first time, that he looks to his peers before he decides to turn hesitation into habit. You can watch a prisoner break and make him into a victim, or you can see the seconds before the break when he tried to negotiate, when he tried to appeal to policy, when he tried to assert that the experiment had rules and the rules had limits. What the basement shows most nakedly is not that people are beasts or that institutions are evil, but that roles are acids. A role dissolves the fibers that hold your private self together. Give people a costume and enough context, and they will borrow a personality that answers to the costume. Take someone's name, and they will speak with a different grammar. Chain one ankle, and the ear begins to hear phantom metal. The sound lingers after the chain is gone. The tape is also a study in how suffering is distributed by design. Punish one man for another's hunger, and you have created a market of resentment. The group will turn on the dissenter because that is the cheapest way to make the pain stop. You do not need to convince anyone of a moral premise. You can simply set the incentives so that collaboration feels expensive and cruelty feels efficient. No manifesto required, just a schedule and a whistle. It is tempting to place the horror in the past, to say, that was then, those were boys, that was a basement dressed for drama, but the architecture repeats. Numbers replace names every day. Account numbers, case numbers, badge numbers. And each replacement makes empathy slightly less likely. Mirror sunglasses are now dashboards in distance, customer service scripts and escalation paths, metrics that ask for throughput and never ask what throughput does to the throat. The whole is now an inbox where messages wait unanswered, a queue where people go when a system doesn't recognize their urgency as real. The closet door is soft close. The silence inside is the same. What could have stopped the slide? Proximity helped in other tapes, the sight of the learner's face, the sound of a voice. Here, proximity was the instrument. It taught mimicry and manufacture. What would have helped was friction at the level of structure, external oversight with authority equal to the superintendent's costume, pre-committed fail-stops that could not be overridden by those wearing the roles, debriefings baked into the design instead of apologies at the end. a rule that no one able to give orders may also write the dictionary of the room. What can be learned without turning this into legend? That speed is a danger. Most of the worst choices happen during the sprint between instruction and action. That anonymity is a drug. Sunglasses, screens, and numbers cut the feedback loop between cause and consequence. That parody becomes practice if you repeat it. The jokes the guards told on day 1 became policy by day 3. That the person who says stop must exist outside the experiment's story. On day 6, the visiting voice ended the play because she did not accept the role the basement offered her. If you want an instruction that does not curdle into moralizing, hold on to this. Beware of rooms that make you into something you have to explain to yourself later. Beware of jobs that replace names with numbers. Beware of uniforms that keep your face safe from the people your choices touch. Beware of leaders who are also narrators, who are also rule makers. Beware of small steps that feel only a little worse than yesterday. And if a door closes behind you and the air turns a different temperature and someone says you are no longer who you were 10 minutes ago, look for the chain on your ankle, even if it is only a sound in your head, and decide quickly what parts of you the costume is not allowed to borrow. The tape ends with men removing caps and chains and smocks, rubbing wrists as if ropes had been there. They speak to the camera with voices that belong to students again, saying they were surprised at themselves, saying they were just doing what the guards did, saying they were keeping the peace. The footage does not answer. It preserves. It keeps the hallway lit. It remembers how easily a room can teach decent people to do indecent things, and how easily decent people can call those things by smaller names. It does not tell you what you would have done. It only paces the distance between the person you prefer to imagine and the person the basement taught others to be. Tape 4, The Pit, HARLOW'S Isolation Chambers, 1960s, Wisconsin. They are born with hands already reaching, pink faces, eyes too large for the skull, fingers that have not yet learned what to hold. In the first minutes they search for a body, any body, that will not vanish when they clutch it. The room gives them 2. One is wire, a lattice of cold metal bent into a mother shape, a bottle welded at the chest, milk ready, angles honest. The other is cloth, a soft frame wrapped in terry, no milk at all, only warmth that is pretend but convincing. The infant hesitates only once. He drinks from the wire, then scuttles back to the cloth and presses himself into its impossible skin. He will repeat this ritual for weeks. Hunger against wire, life against cloth. When the room introduces fear, an opening door, a mechanical toy rattling across the floor, a sudden sound, the infant does not run toward the source of food. He runs toward the cloth and becomes smaller in its crook, as if the fabric could become wall. When placed in an open field alone, he squeals and paces, an orbit with no planet. When the cloth is wheeled in, he calms and explores, returning to the surrogate like punctuation between sentences. You watch the loop form. Venture, return. Fear, press. Press. Curiosity, check. Meaning measured in inches of terry. The notes will name this contact comfort, as if language could sand the edge off. The lab does not stop at comfort. It builds a cruelties choir and gives each section a job. One surrogate blasts compressed air until tiny bodies flatten against the cage. Another jerks forward without warning, bucking the infant like a mild earthquake. A third bristles with wires that spring outward, porcupine mother, a term that pretends at humor to disguise experiment. The infants scream and cling harder. Some cry and cling anyway. The attachment holds, ragged and durable, and the conclusion grows louder. It is not milk, but contact that sells safety to the nervous system. Then the room changes shape and drops its mask. A vertical chamber stands ready in the corner, a steel well with sloping walls that prevent climbing, edges polished too slick for nails to catch. Its door closes with a sound that learns its way into your teeth. They call it the Well of Despair, because the man who built it refused to be coy. Others later will call it the Pit. The light is thin inside, the floor bare, the world narrow and monotonous. Infants are lowered in alone for weeks, sometimes months. The chamber does not touch them with spikes or air. It merely refuses them a body. It is a mother made of distance. On the first day, the infant throws himself against steel in every direction, cashing bruises where he hoped for exits. On the second, He paces the perimeter until his steps lay a track visible to the eye. On the third, the pacing slows and a rocking begins, fore and aft, the body inventing movement where none is possible, an engine with no destination that runs to keep the mind from stalling. At 2 weeks, the eyes dim. At 3, the hands forget how to reach. At 4, the animal inside the animal begins to vanish, replaced by a shape that keeps breathing because breath has not yet learned how to stop. When they are lifted from the pit and placed near others, they do not greet. They cannot tolerate contact. Appears curious approach, hands out, head tilted, becomes a threat that folds them back into the posture of the chamber, knees drawn, forearms wrapped, chin tucked, rocking, a loop that continues even when the steel is gone. Their coat looks the same. Their body has a new weather. The notes called anaclitic depression, isolation syndrome, so many syllables where one feeling would do, alone. The lab continues. Some isolates are impregnated later because the experiment must ask how deprivation breeds motherhood. They cannot mate easily. The lab creates an apparatus for restraint that earns a name you do not want spoken in a room with children. When the infants of the deprived arrive, some mothers hold them like fragile puzzles that do not solve. Some ignore them completely. Some attack as if the tiny body were the sound of the chamber returning. The room records, and the pen writes, because that is what the pen is trained to do. You could end the story there and call it evidence. Cloth over wire, touch over milk, presence over provision, the necessity of bodies in the making of bodies. But the tape insists on more. It insists on the hours between the footage, the small caretakers who grew quiet, the technicians who learned to make their face a wall so a scream could bounce. It insists on the man at the center who invited the world to look at love as an instrument and then showed them what happened when the instrument was broken. It insists that you notice how clean words can become a costume for dirty work, how a noun like isolation lifts the guilt out of a verb like isolate. Now the commentary. Attachment, once treated as a sentimental fog, became measurable here. The surrogate studies cut a behaviorist thread that had tied love to feeding alone. The infants chose warmth without milk over milk without warmth. When frightened, they clung, and clinging calmed them enough to face the open field. Those moments traveled from lab bench to hospital ward, from cages to cribs. The case for touch, for holding, for the truth that a caregiver's body is an organ without which the nervous system starves. In that sense, the tapes moved a culture. But the pit itself, its locked mouth, its luminous cruelty, moved a culture in a different direction. It forced the conversation about method and mercy. What do we permit in the name of understanding comfort? How much terror is debt for a sentence in a textbook? The chamber did not simply measure deprivation. It produced it at industrial purity. The rocking isolates became icons not only of what happens when you remove the world, but of what happens when a field ceases to notice the person inside the subject. The very clarity of the results now reads like an indictment. If your instrument works because suffering is absolute, your instrument may be the problem. There are defenses, and they are not trivial. The work punctured a doctrine that was wrong and harming human infants. The idea that food is the only currency attachment listens to. Neonatal care changed. Orphanages whispered the word holding with less condescension. Adoption and foster programs found language for why stability matters. Primatology itself learned thousands of truths about social buffering, grooming as medicine, the chemical grammar of consolation. A later century did not need to replicate the worst to believe the most humane. There are counterpoints, and they should not be filed under sentimentality. The generalization from macaques to humans is not direct line, but crooked rhyme. The interpretation of love risks anthropomorphism if the word is allowed to do all the work. The lab created extremes, total isolation for long stretches, that ordinary human cruelty rarely reaches for infants without killing them outright. There were methodological controls that improved later, and language that softened appropriately when the initial certainty grew teeth. Knowing these does not absolve the chamber. It places it in the archive with a label that reads, necessary for history, not to be reopened. Ethics matured around the pit like scar tissue. Committees with teeth, protocols for minimizing distress, endpoints monitored by people not invested in the result, a bar for justification that does not bend under charisma. Some of this bureaucracy is parody of care. Some of it is care, finally allowed to take a seat at the table where design happens. We can be grateful for the guardrails without pretending they erase the road they line. There is a more private lesson the tape leaves behind, one it would be easy to miss if you file the story under Monster Scientist and close the drawer. The infants did not rock because they were weak. They rocked because their bodies produced a rhythm in absence of any other rhythm to synchronize to. The pattern is not unique to macaques. Humans do it too. In rooms where touch is scarce, in lives where eyes seldom meet, the nervous system invents movement to keep from going out. Some of us call it fidgeting, some pacing, some scrolling, some workaholism, so total that silence feels like steel. Another lesson: comfort is not a luxury item you add after the experiment ends. Comfort is the condition under which the brain can do anything but defend itself. Feed the infant without holding him, and you can keep him alive while starving a different organ. Hold the infant without feeding him, and you will kill him with tenderness. The duet is the instruction. Food and touch, safety and exploration, bodies as answers, not metaphors. If you are looking for a way to live with what the pit showed without becoming either zealot or cynic, consider this grammar. When the data ask for a sentence that includes suffering, make sure the sentence also includes a because, not because harm sharpens results, but because the question could not be asked otherwise, and because you have already tried every way to ask it without harm and failed. Then, if the sentence still must be written, write it publicly with names and oversight, and with a plan for how to repair what you break. The pit's worst sin was not only what it did to monkeys, it was the confidence with which it did it in a room that invited admiration. The final picture in the stack is not the vertical chamber. It is an infant, years later, pressed against another body in a grooming huddle, eyes half closed, rocking slowed to a murmur. You do not call this recovery. You call it evidence that nervous systems will take any foothold offered and grow as much life as the ledge allows. The tapes taught us what absence does. The animals taught us what presence can still repair. If you ever meet a creature that was asked to grow in a pit, monkey, child, adult with the shape of steel carried inside, resist the urge to teach them with wire. Begin with cloth. Feed them, yes. Then give them a body to borrow until theirs remembers. And when they rock, understand it not as pathology alone, but as proof that somewhere, in the worst room a mind can be placed, movement learned how to keep the pilot light on. Tape 5, The Mask, Landis's Facial Expressions, 1924, Columbia. He sits on a high stool under a lamp that turns skin to porcelain. A bottle of black grease paint opens with a sigh. The researcher's hand is steady, his cuff immaculate as he draws lines across the student's face, straight down the bridge of the nose, across both cheeks like latitude, small ticks at the corners of the mouth as if measuring a coastline. The brush moves with the confidence of a portraitist. The subject becomes a map. Don't move, the voice says, though the lines themselves invite stillness. A camera clicks from the shadows, a box with a lens the size of a teacup. A sheet of paper on the wall behind the stool marks centimeters like a police intake. The student is a volunteer, but also a captive of curiosity and the era's obedience to lab coats. His eyes flick to the door each time the shutter opens, as if the door could be a witness. The session begins politely. A cotton swab dipped in ammonia floats toward his nose. His head jerks back, eyes water, the black lines warp into an expression his grandparents would call a face. The camera takes it. Next, a drop of bitter quinine on the tongue. Lips purse, cheeks hollow, chin dimples. Take. A phonograph needle drops and jazz scratches the air. A burst of laughter from the corridor leaks under the door, dies at the threshold. The researcher strikes a match and lets it burn down so close the student feels the small sun singe the air above his upper lip. Blink. Take. The grease paint freezes the motions into diagrams even as the skin pulls away from them. Then the requests tilt. Place your hand in this bucket, and the hand goes into ice. The breath hitches. Forehead lines deepen into an alphabet no one has yet learned to read. A live frog on a tray. Touch it. Hold it still. The subject swallows a noise and does as told, the mouth shaping a word he does not say. The camera collects it. The operator rarely speaks. When he does, it is to calibrate. Face front. Do not smile unless you must. He is shown a picture, something domestic first, then something explicitly meant to trouble. War wounds from a medical atlas, a staged scene of a body on a floor with an angle that pretends to be accident. Take. The subject attempts composure. The grease paint betrays him, broadcasting micro-movements like semaphore. He laughs once, high and thin, a laugh not rooted in humor, but in the human reflex that tries to puncture tension with air. The researcher writes, amusement, as if the question mark might forgive him. There is an interlude with a snake, harmless, the handler assures, though the animal's tongue reads the room with a script faster than humans can follow. The student holds steady until the head turns toward his wrist. The expression that results looks like a chord struck between dread and calculation. Then the door opens and the lab assistant arrives with a wooden box the size of a drawer. The rat inside flinches from light, the way light flinches from basements. White, young, the kind kept for labs because whiteness makes it visible against everything. The box contains a knife, bright and indifferent, its handle worn by hands that might prefer not to remember themselves. The researcher clears his throat and says the sentence that turns history to ice. Please decapitate the rat. Silence is the longest stimulus they administer all day. The subject blinks as if he misheard. His mouth opens. He glances not at the camera but at the man with the brush, as if the lines on his face were a chain now. Another volunteer in the background, in another time, another photograph, had done it quickly. Others had refused. Some had tried and failed, sawing through an animal that did not understand the word study. Here, the student trembles in the pause between person and instrument. He negotiates, is this necessary? The word lands strangely in the room because everything here is designed to sound necessary even when it is not. We need strong emotions, the researcher says. Fear, disgust, the face must be true. The rat's feet scrabble against wood. The camera waits, patient as a predator. He reaches. His hand is a bad tool. The knife lifts, then hesitates, then descends. In some reels, the blade does not finish the sentence. In others, the white coat takes over. Tidy, efficient, an act completed off screen, the sound a small mechanical tragedy. Either way, the moment colonizes the face. Grease paint lines knot into a pattern that no atlas can tidy. The mouth becomes a wound in its own right. The eyes glance away and then, unforgivably, back. The camera takes it. The camera takes everything. After, the room tries to become ordinary again. A fresh swab. Smell this. A paper test. Name a word that rhymes with, as if language could sweep sawdust out of a throat. The subject stares straight ahead while being made to perform minor civilities. The lines on his face have smudged where sweat and feeling have tried to erase the grid. The session ends with a handkerchief and a mirror. He wipes the makeup away until the sink's water runs gray. He leaves different. In the next set of photographs, a different student sits under the same lamp with the same map on his cheeks, and the ritual repeats with variables adjusted. Louder match, colder bucket, heavier box. You can catalog the aftermaths. Some faces resolve into shock's blankness, the musculature gone quiet as a deer's. Some twist into anger so brief it is almost private. Some clasp their hands in their laps, so tightly you see white crescents at the nails. You also see the faces that return to neutral rapidly, the way a pond's surface stills after a thrown object sinks. And you wonder whether the stillness is skill, shock, or simple surrender. The album of prints that survives calls these expressions. The lab notebook calls them records. The newspapers, when they cared at all, called them strange. The vermin in the box had no word for what happened to it. The closest would be wind. Now the commentary. The premise was simple and wrong, that each basic emotion has a unique, universal facial signature readable across people like notes on a staff, and that such signatures could be provoked, captured, and cataloged if one only cleared away the noise of modesty and decorum. Draw lines on faces to make muscle movement legible. Present stimuli that force the nervous system to write with its muscles. Read the script. It would be elegant if the human face were a piano. Isn't. What Landis learned, though he did not always write it down with enough humility, was that the human face is a chorus with too many voices to isolate a single melody. Surprise can lift brows or freeze them. Disgust can wrinkle the nose or shut the whole apparatus down. Fear is a buffet of options. Flare, flatten, fold. The lines helped detect movement, they did not translate it. The photograph stole a moment and displayed it, but meaning bled all around that moment into history, context, personhood. If this were merely a story about a misfired hypothesis, we could file it under method and move on. It is worse because of what the lab used to pull feelings out of people. Animal death as a lever coerced participation under the halo of science, a room that made refusal feel like superstition or cowardice. Consent in 1924 did not speak the language we demand now. Even so, you can see in the students' faces the moment when curiosity turns to complicity. The most efficient way to manufacture an authentic expression turned out to be not art, but violence. The resulting photographs show something raw and unrepeatable. That is not a defense. It is an indictment with evidence attached. Later decades will do cleaner work. Some will argue for families of expressions, Ekman's spreadsheets of action units, muscles coded like coordinates, more careful stimuli, consent that means what it says, ethics committees that can say no. Others will show how culture writes itself into faces, how a grimace in one place is a smile in another, how a learned display rule can override what the viscera would prefer. Still others will doubt the entire project and claim that emotion is not a facial state at all, but a negotiated meaning. Body, context, story, all at once, so that photographing a face is like photographing a single word and calling it a novel. The tapes, when they exist, the stills where they survive, and the notes we have are more than curiosities. They are warnings. They tell you what a lab will do when it decides a person is mostly a face mostly a machine, and a machine a thing you can read like a meter if only you push the right buttons. They also tell you how easily an institution can convince the young that refusal is an error in the experiment rather than the limit that keeps knowledge human. It is not inherently wicked to want to understand expressions. We live by them. A child learns safety by studying the geometry of a caregiver's eyes. A jury watches lips and decides futures. Lovers read the millimeter shifts around a mouth and call it intimacy. We should understand faces. But understanding faces by asking someone to kill while you watch is the kind of shortcut that gets you to the wrong destination. With photographs so vivid, they disguise the fact that what you learned is mostly how pain looks when it is cornered. There are other lessons that emerge only if you stare longer than is polite. First, mapping is not knowledge. The grease paint lines felt like progress because they turned motion into measurement. But measurement without meaning is a ritual that photographs itself. Second, provocation is not authenticity. The truest faces in these albums may be truest only to the lab's power, not to the human condition. Third, the camera is not a witness. It is an accomplice unless someone in the room remembers what a stop button is for. If you want to salvage something useful and not monstrous from this history, try this. Treat faces as sentences, not letters. Read them inside paragraphs made of bodies, settings, relationships, histories. Assume display rules before you assume essence. Make your provocation ethical, reversible, proportionate. And when a protocol drifts toward a box with a knife inside, close the box and call what you almost did by its real name. The man on the stool washed the lines from his cheeks and went home to a mirror that did not measure him. The photographs remained. People would look at them for decades and say, see how disgust looks, see how fear looks, see how the mouth confesses what the mind hides. Some would learn something, many would learn the wrong thing. A few would learn the thing that matters most, that there are kinds of knowing not worth the price a face pays to produce them. The rat is not a footnote. It is the center. It is the hinge that swings the session from curiosity to shame. If the goal is to see the human mask slip, then yes, produce a demand that makes the soul flinch. The mask will slip. You will capture it. You will have a picture of a person who has become someone they cannot explain to themselves. And if you frame that picture and call it science without telling the story of the box it cost, you will have turned evidence into a weapon you aim at other rooms. The last image is quiet, a subject after the session, unmarked, face clean, eyes raw with the particular brightness that follows a room where you could not refuse. He is not making an expression. He is resting from having made so many that day. The photograph cannot capture rest, not really. But the absence of lines reads like relief. It is the only picture worth keeping. Tape 6, Sleep Room. Montreal Psychic Driving, 1957 to 64. Allan Memorial. She signs in, thinking she will rest. That is how the brochure framed it. A modern hospital on the mountain, stone and glass, nurses in neat whites, a promise to quiet the mind until the mind remembers itself. She has been sleeping poorly and crying for no reason she can explain to the people who love her. She wants the noise to stop. She wants to go home more than anything. They take her wedding band and put it in an envelope with a number on it. Paper slippers, a bracelet, a corridor that smells like disinfectant and floor wax and old books. A nurse with a practiced gentleness leads her into a pale room with 4 beds and low lamps that never fully go dark. There are small speakers fixed above each pillow. She thinks they are for music. The first days pass inside cotton, pills handed at regular intervals, injections that tug the eyelids down like weights. She sleeps and wakes and sleeps without knowing which is which. A doctor she meets once speaks of de-patterning, a clinical word with no edges, and of rebuilding healthy patterns once the old ones soften. He speaks with the calm of a man talking about paint. She recognizes that calm from men who once told her a tooth extraction would be a pinch. The voice begins on the 3rd day, a woman's voice, unhurried, free of accent. It says her name. It says something about how she feels. It speaks in the 2nd person and then in the 1st so that her own mind cannot decide whether it is being addressed or rehearsed. The sentences repeat. They repeat until repetition stops being a property of time and becomes a property of air. At first, she understands them as suggestions, then as weather, then as the only thing that exists when her eyes close. The voice grows louder at night, or else the night takes away the other sounds that make voices tolerable. The nurse turns the knob under the speaker by habit, the way people lower blinds. When she wakes, her mouth is dry as paper. The voice is still speaking. It has not tired. It never coughs. It never asks if she is hearing it. Electrode gel, a rubber bite block. The machine with the leather straps is brought in like a piece of furniture and rolled against the bed. A mask with a rubber smell. Hands that hold her forearm with the professional affection of people who have done this many times. Black, then white, then a blank that feels like falling while lying still. When she returns, there is a behind-the-eyes taste of metal and a rectangle of time missing where something had been. She asks the nurse what day it is. The nurse says the day out loud as if the day were medicine. Her sister visits once and leaves quickly because she cannot find the woman she came to see behind the smile and the sedatives. Later, her sister will tell people she saw a tape recorder on a cart, an extension cord snaking under the bed, a loop of tape turning without pause. She will say she heard a sentence 6 times in 1 minute while she was there and knows they did not pause when she left. Other women sleep in the room. Some wear blindfolds to keep the lights from sawing at their heads. One moans delicately as if something were being unspooled inside her without pain. Another lies so still that only the speaker beside her mouth proves she is not marble. An orderly asks if the visitor will step into the hall a moment because the ladies need their rest. The days collect. She no longer knows what she brought with her, who she saw, how long she has been here. She remembers the voice better than her own. Sometimes it speaks in the form of a kindness, praising her for things she has not done. Sometimes it speaks like a rule, telling her who she is and who she will be when she leaves. Sometimes sentences arrive that do not sound like care at all. To her in that room, it is all the same. She is the furniture the voice passes through. They change the content of the loop because the protocol says to. Positive statements after negative statements, or the other way around. They increase the hours, they increase the amperage, they increase the doses that keep the body quiet while the voice does its work. A staff member scribbles numbers on a chart clipped to the foot of the bed and tucks the pencil behind the ear as if finishing a crossword. She learns how to wake without coming back. Her face opens politely and closes again around a sentence that is not her own. The calendar in the nurse's station shows that weeks have passed. Her head shows that time has decided to fold. She uses a spoon as if the spoon were a new invention. She does not remember her doctor's name when he stands at her side. He says progress. He says better. He says, as he always says, that the work now will prevent pain later. When they at last begin to lift the fog, she stares at her hands as if they were two small animals finding the way home. Another voice, this time belonging to a human being in the room, asks her where she lives. She hesitates because the room answers before she does. The speaker has not been switched off long. She thinks she hears it under the question, like a whisper behind wallpaper. In the weeks after discharge, she will fail to recognize the way to her own kitchen. The children will sound like visitors. She will stop mid-sentence, search the air for a word, and select the wrong one. She will discover that certain seasons are missing. She will be praised for sleeping through what used to keep her awake and will not be asked what else was put to sleep with it. Years later, she will hear an elevator chime and feel her throat close because of how closely it resembles something she cannot remember having hated. Some patients complained immediately, even within the drugged fog, and were told the discomfort was the sound of healing. Some never found the words until they were much older. Some never found them at all. There are names and signatures now attached to forms that call what was done to them therapy. There are other signatures on documents that call it something else. What the loop tapes intended is recorded plainly. Erase the unhealthy pattern, install the healthy one, like sanding a table and painting it. It is an idea seductive to people who prefer to imagine the mind as a machine. It follows a clean logic. If the brain wires by repetition, then repetition can rewire it. If the self has been formed by habit, then habits can be overwritten by stronger songs. If the problem is learned, then unlearning and relearning are not violence but hygiene. The tape loops play the part of a toothbrush. What the loops accomplished is more complicated. Some people came in with depression and left with less, some with far more. Some came in with ordinary grief and left with extraordinary gaps. Some came in lost and left blank enough to be called improved. Many came in without informed consent and left wishing they had been given a choice. The line between quieting a storm and erasing the map is not as bright as the people who built the room believed. The language around the method was built for innocence, driving, depatterning, sleep therapy, words that sound like traffic and music and rest. The recordings themselves were sometimes presented as the patient's own voice played back to herself, as if the loop were not an instruction, but a mirror. The wider funding, when it arrived from offices without windows, did not change the bedside manner. Money from men who had reasons for wanting to know how to make people answer to voices did not rewrite the chart. It simply rewound the tape. There are arguments, old and fresh, about whether the doctor who ran this believed he was saving people by breaking the bad part and extending the good, whether the times excused the hunger for clean mechanisms, whether the consent forms of the era should be judged by our standards. There are counter-arguments that do not fit into forms. A family who found their mother returned to them altered in ways that never repaired. A man who could not keep a job because he could not keep a thought. A woman who slept soundly and woke to find that the parts of her that made the world make sense had also been put to bed. One can acknowledge that the research came wrapped in the belief that the human animal is plastic enough to forgive ambitious hands, and still insist that some ambitions are forms of forgetting. Forgetting, for example, that autonomy is not a disease to be cured. Forgetting that people consent to what they understand. Forgetting that there is a difference between persuading and installing. Forgetting that the nervous system is a creature, not drywall. If there is a lesson here that can be extracted without turning grief into a moral for someone else's book, it is this. Repetition is powerful enough to heal and powerful enough to harm, and the difference is not the nobility of the goal, but the willingness of the person being repeated into. Anything you do to a mind without its informed, ongoing yes will eventually be called by its right name. Anything you do to a mind with its yes must still survive the test of whether you can give it back what you took to do it. There is another quieter lesson. People are not loops. They do not change because a sentence is played enough times. They change because something inside them chooses to answer a sentence with another sentence that became theirs through living. Programs do not replace experiences. They mimic them loudly. The loudness works briefly until the body insists on being more complicated again. If you want to understand why these tapes feel like horror even when the voice is kind, listen to one sentence repeated 1,000 times in an empty room. Listen as it becomes nonsense and then architecture as it stops being a statement and becomes a wall. Most of us can tolerate a wall for a day. Few of us can live in a house with no doors. Decades later, the building still stands. The sleep rooms are bright and ordinary now. The speakers have been removed. The nurses who were young then are old or gone. The city has a different skyline, one that pretends it does not remember. But if you stand in the hallway long enough, you can hear a memory that does not belong to you, a voice with infinite patience and no curiosity telling a person who she is until the person disappears into hearing it. Tape 7, Safehouse Windows, Operation Midnight Climax, 1950s to 60s, CIA. He thinks she likes him. That is the first ingredient. The bar is dim enough to erase noon. She laughs into his shoulder with a practiced softness, orders him a martini their way, and touches his hand when the drink arrives. He has never been hunted, and so he does not know the hunt is already over. They walk 3 blocks through a neighborhood that smells like frying garlic and salt air, the kind of San Francisco night that forgives everyone. The apartment is on an upper floor, the kind of door that sticks unless you lift while you turn. Inside there's a mural painted on one wall, pastoral, almost comic, and a couch with fabric too loud for its shape. A bathroom down the hall, curtains drawn, a small hum somewhere, steady as a refrigerator. She tells him to relax. She pours. Her glass is water with a twist. His is not. It is not bitter enough to warn him. He drinks because this is a private holiday he suddenly believes he deserves. The room tilts half a degree and keeps tilting. He laughs because laughter is the first defense the body tries when a rule quietly breaks. She is asking him about his job, about who he knows, about places he travels. He answers with the loose generosity of a man who thinks he's being charming. He does not see the pencil marks behind the framed painting where a camera's eye used to be, or the hole under the baseboard where a microphone swallows air like a mouth. Across the wall, through glass that looks like a mirror from inside the apartment but is a window from the next room, a man sits on a stool and writes the date on a yellow legal pad. The pad is already layered with names that are not names, descriptions that are not precise enough to be kind. He takes a sip of gin from a heavy glass and blinks as if dust got in his eye. He prefers to call the men Johns rather than citizens. It keeps the mind from snagging on the wrong hooks. The first wave comes like a warm wind blowing through the bones. The second wave shifts the size of things so the glass grows and the hand holding it becomes too far away to belong to a body. He tries to keep his voice steady. It comes out as if spoken down a hallway. She leans closer and asks him something personal in a tone that pretends to be reverence. He tells the truth because the truth has suddenly lost its sharpness. In the observation room, a tape reel turns. Brown ribbon moving from full to empty, the slow siphon of a life becoming evidence. The man behind the glass marks timestamps beside onset, hallucination, suggestible, sexual behavior. He signals to the unseen technician with 2 fingers, increase volume to the bedroom mic, decrease in the bath. He writes, subject laughs at nothing, then crosses out nothing and writes air. The apartment is a staged kindness. He is allowed to feel safe while he is not. When he stands, his legs forget coordination, and he sits again with the surprised gratitude of a child who didn't fall. In the mirror, he catches his own face and flinches because it is both his and not. The mural leans toward him. The floor asks questions. The one across from him is an anchor that costs extra. She keeps him inside the script. She asks the same question 3 ways to make sure the answer is steady. Who do you tell things to? Where do you go on Thursdays? If someone asked you to keep a secret, what would you need in return? He feels like a saint for speaking. He feels like a sinner. The room rewards both feelings. Downstairs, a car idles long enough to pretend it's part of the soundtrack of the city. Upstairs, the man behind the glass makes note of the moment when euphoria turns to the opposite, when joy sours into fear, and the heart accelerates as if called to a race the body did not train for. He writes panic threshold and places his fingertip on the glass, a gesture he would interpret as paternal if asked on a witness stand. Between them, the woman lowers her voice and talks to the man on the couch like a pilot talking a passenger through weather. Breathe. You're all right. Sit with me. Nothing bad can happen here. He believes her because he has to buy someone's story before the room gets too loud. He visits the bathroom and surprises himself with the intensity of his own pupils. He finds a camera in the mirror that is not there. He watches his hand move and suspects it of conspiracy. Back in the living room, she has moved closer, knees touching his, so he can feel the world through 2 points of contact instead of none. He tells her something he's never told anyone, because secrecy suddenly feels like a weight he can set down. He does not know where the words go when they leave his mouth. One of the recordings from another night captures a different sort of man, older, bitterer, who begins by boasting and ends by accusing the lamp of interrogation. He rips the curtain down. He finds the glass. He pounds on it and shouts. The observation room becomes a theater briefly, with the man behind the glass playing the role of ghost. Eventually, the subject folds in on himself on the carpet and weeps the kind of weeping that belongs to children and those who cannot afford witnesses. The tape records it. The tape records everything. There are pages in the notebook devoted to substances other than the one favored here. There is a page that records what happens when the woman leaves the room for 5 minutes after dosing and returns to a man paced into a corner with the weight of the world pressed against his forehead. There is a page that records what happens when the dose is accidental, in a drink at a bar without any woman at all, only men in ties and one man who is paid to make sure the unlucky one gets home with his wallet and a new empty in his memory. It runs for years. 2 cities, a handful of apartments disguised as vice and paid for as research. Women instructed and compensated to bring men in. Men instructed and compensated to watch. Governments persuaded that this knowledge would save lives because the enemy might be doing worse. The tapes pile up, audio mostly, photographs of faces that have stopped defending, notes that read like parodies of science and like science simultaneously. Because the only difference in this room is consent, and consent is everything. When it's over for him, the subject staggers to the sink and splashes water into a face he no longer trusts. The woman tells him to breathe again and again as if she is trying to hypnotize water. She kisses him because that is part of the story of why he came here. He leaves with a new story already forming in his mouth for the morning. A story that keeps his marriage while removing from memory the details that would ruin the teller. He does not know that a reel-to-reel in a cabinet 2 rooms away holds the version where he used the wrong pronoun for a superior, where he boasted of a scheme he will later deny he even imagined, where his fear articulated itself as confession for a crime he will never commit. The man behind the glass watches the door close. He writes, "Recovery good." He lights a cigarette and holds the smoke in his lungs until his chest feels like a drawer full of pins. He thinks, but would never write, that he prefers the subjects who turn sheepish after the storm, who say, "My drink must have been strong," who leave grateful to the woman for keeping them company through a phantom. He does not think of himself as a criminal. He thinks of himself as a technician in a theater, where reality learns it has fewer rights than rumor. Commentary. The apartments were real. The mirrors were windows. The women were there to bring men in and to see them out. The drinks were dosed. The conversations were recorded. The operation wore a euphemism like an overcoat. Safe houses. They were safe only for the people with keys. Justifying logic came easy. The mid-century science of influence wanted levers that could move men without chains. The mid-century war wanted defenses against an enemy it imagined would liquefy minds. Truth serum, behavior modification, the dream of extracting secrets without scars. You can write these phrases with a straight face until you add the word unwitting. Then the grammar shows its teeth. Science without consent is not science. It is theater with notes. What was learned? That certain doses turn human interiors into funhouse mirrors. That sex disarms while a microphone arms itself. That secrecy makes people feel less accountable and therefore more fluid. That a person will say more to a stranger who feels like a secret than to a spouse who feels like a ledger. That if you want a man to believe something about himself, talk to him at the altitude where his fear lives, and then offer to land the plane. What was not learned is longer. LSD did not become a reliable truth serum. The behavior of startled men in brothel rooms does not generalize well to interrogations or courtrooms or policy. Ethics learned more than intelligence did. Clandestine labs are not laboratories. Results extracted under deception evaporate when brought into the light where science is supposed to live. There is also what was destroyed. A superior order's files shredded and they go. What remains is a pattern written into surviving memos and memories and the conscience of a few people who kept copies in their heads. A Senate committee drags what it can up the stairs and discovers that when sunlight hits some rooms, the paint peels off in scales big enough to hold names. The names belong to people who designed the rooms, not the men who entered them and left with new absences. If you are tempted to file this under antique sin, pause. The architecture persists with new names. Two-way glass becomes one-way terms of service. Consent becomes a box you click after a long day. Surveillance becomes quality assurance. Dosing becomes priming. A stranger tells you a story in your private screen, and while you are listening, your guard dissolves. You say more than you meant to because the room is yours and therefore seems safe. Behind the glass, people take notes and call it research. They, too, prefer citizens to be called users because it keeps the mind from snagging on the wrong hooks. The moral, if there is one you can carry without it turning pious, is not that people are weak. It is that rooms are strong. Rooms designed to lower your audience and raise your temperature can move you faster than your values can catch you. If you do not know who is listening, assume anyone could be. If you do not know what is in the glass, assume it contains a story someone else wants you to tell. And if you are the one building rooms, remember this: secrecy does not make your methods sharper, it makes your conscience duller. Consent is not a box to be checked after the fact. It is the ground that decides whether you are studying minds or breaking them. A tape that requires a person to be ignorant to play is not a record of knowledge. It is a record of domination written in other people's voices. Years later, a man cannot pass a certain building without feeling a museum open in his chest. He cannot drink a martini if the olives are the wrong kind of green. He cannot explain to his wife why certain nights he walks to the window and stares into his own reflection as if waiting to be told what he did. Somewhere a recording exists of a voice that sounds like him but was not him, not really, saying things he would never say in any room that respected his name. It is filed under a number. It is a piece of evidence for a case no court will hear. He is real. The window was real. So was the drink. The tape ran until it ate its tail. Tape 8, The White Room, HEBB'S Sensory Deprivation, 1951, McGill. He is a student who needs the money. $3 an hour is good pay for sitting still. He signs the consent because it sounds like rest. Lie on a cot in a quiet room, keep the goggles and gloves on, press the bell if you need the washroom. Nothing strenuous. They call it perceptual isolation. He imagines a nap with a stipend. The room smells faintly of dust and disinfectant. The light is even, without shadow. They fit him with translucent goggles that turn the world into milk. No edges, only glow. His fingertips go into cotton gloves, and then cardboard cuffs slip over his forearms up to the elbow, making his hands into soft paddles that cannot read texture. Foam rests beside his ears, and a low, constant hum, ventilation, a fan, fills the air until it becomes the only thing left to measure time by. The door closes with a sound too polite to be a lock. At first, the stillness feels like luxury. He inventories his body the way you count change, one shoulder, then the other, the weight of a foot, the slow tide of breath. He tries to keep a running list of thoughts to ward off boredom. He is surprised by how soon the list repeats. He starts over and can't remember how far he got the last time. Hours pass, or minutes, or a weather with no name. He naps. He thinks about napping. He wonders whether he is asleep or remembering having slept. The hum resolves itself into patterns that are not there. Rhythms that sound like speech behind a wall, fragments of melody he cannot place. The goggles, unblinking, roll their fog right up to the edges of his skull. He pictures a calendar to anchor himself. It slides away. He recites multiplication tables, then lyrics, then the names of the streets that lead from campus to his boarding house. The syllables loosen. They do not feel owned. He presses the bell for the washroom, and when they lead him there, the light in the corridor is so sharp it hurts. He cups water in his muffled hands and misses half of it. When they settle him back into the cot, the room feels more like a mouth than a room. On what might be the second day, pictures arrive not as thoughts, but as visitors. A line of dots drifts across the blank field and forms a grid that breathes. He sees a parade of tiny figures in pointed hats walking single file along the edge of his vision. Then turning at a corner his eyes cannot find again. When he tries to blink them away, the goggles refuse him the relief of eyelids. He discovers, to his disgust, that closing his eyes makes the parade brighter. He laughs once at something small and unreal, and hears his laugh come back to him as if the room were wider than it is. He speaks his own name to keep the inside of his head inhabited. His name sounds like someone else trying his mouth on. Between visits to the washroom, he is asked to perform simple tasks. They read out a paragraph and ask him to summarize it. His voice snags on the words as if they were cloth. They give him a puzzle to imagine and solve, something he would ordinarily enjoy. He cannot hold the steps still long enough to climb them. He apologizes without knowing to whom. Sleep becomes a loop with torn edges. He dreams in smears. He wakes into smaller smears. He tells himself the dots and little men are the result of boredom, that boredom is survivable. Then an entire scene stages itself behind his eyes. A gray dog pads into the room and sits on its haunches beside the cot, licks an invisible paw, and looks at him with patient disinterest. It is so plausible he tries to reach out and touch it with padded hands. His fingers find only air. Tears arrive without their reasons. He presses the bell again and asks the attendant what time it is. The attendant tells him a number that means nothing. He asks how long he has been here and is told another number that sounds like a lie. He wants to go outside and then he wants to go back in, because the corridor felt like being dropped into a different experiment. Too bright, too thin, too loud. On what might be day 3, language misbehaves. He tries to pray and the prayer unthreads. He tries to rehearse the alphabet backwards and cannot remember which letter comes before Q, because Q has started liking the company of H so much it refuses to be seen without it. The little men return, now carrying banners with no words on them. They circle the bed and chant in a way that fits exactly into the hum, so he cannot tell where one ends and the other begins. He is not alone in the wing. Across the hallway, other cots hold other students who also needed the stipend. He hears a cough, then a lullaby sung too slowly in a small voice that has forgotten the next notes. When an attendant opens his door to deliver a meal, sandwich, milk, the smell of bread tastes like architecture. He swallows carefully to remember the shape of food. He thanks the attendant, and thanks him again, because gratitude is the only word that still seems to fit into his mouth. After he is removed for the last time because he asks, because they tell him he has done enough hours, because the schedule has its own mercy, he wobbles down the corridor with his hands naked and his eyes allowed to have edges again. The air in the stairwell feels like weather he grew up in and forgot. On the street, patterns attack. Traffic seems choreographed by a hostile god. He shields his face, though there is nothing falling. In the debrief room, they ask him to listen to a passage and summarize it again. He stares at the page as if it were a new invention. He cannot keep the first sentence from slipping while he reaches for the second. He swears he used to be better at this. He sleeps 13 hours and wakes with his hands braced the way they were braced in the room, as if pillows would slide off the world if he did not hold them still. He returns a week later to collect the last of his pay. He hears himself answer questions with a higher voice than he remembers owning. He jokes about seeing things and laughs the obligate laugh that pretends to move on. That night, when the dorm radiator starts its usual clank, he sits in the dark and waits for the parade. It does not come. He discovers a new category of fear, waiting for a hallucination you no longer believe in, but for which your body still keeps a chair empty. Commentary. The tape shows how quickly the person we call a mind begins to invent when the world refuses it what it needs. Vision is a negotiation between light and expectation. Remove the first and expectation signs the whole contract. Hearing is a tug of war between signal and noise. Remove most of the signal and noise wins by acclamation. Touch is a treaty between skin and shape. Mute the skin and shape becomes conspiracy. Within days, healthy young adults begin to see cartoons that feel like scripture. to hear choirs and fans, to feel a dread out of scale with the room because the room has stopped telling the truth. The results were written politely. Subjects experienced vivid visual and auditory phenomena. Performance on cognitive tasks declined. Time estimation became unreliable. Persistence was poor. Distress increased. Most requested termination before the planned 3 days. The research asked for a map of what happens when you take away pattern. It received a warning. The brain is a pattern engine before it is anything else. Starve it and it will eat its own tail. Ethics were simpler and thinner then. The volunteers were paid. They signed a form that said they would lie in a room and wear goggles and gloves. None of the form could have described the specific loneliness of watching your mind build companions out of hum. None of them could have priced the hour where your name leaves you and returns wearing a stranger's coat. The experimenters were not torturers. Many saw their subjects struggle and ended sessions early. Some later said the study unsettled them enough to abandon the line of inquiry. But a different set of readers, military, intelligence, read the reports with a different appetite. If you can produce confusion and compliance with light, sound, and time, you do not need bruises. A wing born from curiosity about perception became a seed for methods that prefer to call themselves no touch. The science learned a great deal. It learned that hallucination is not proof of disease. It is proof of a nervous system doing its job too well in famine. It learned that attention is a muscle that needs friction to stay honest. It learned that boredom becomes pain when it lasts long enough, and pain becomes anything you need it to be to make it mean something. It learned, unintentionally, that isolation is a solvent that dissolves more than distractions. It dissolves the scaffolding that keeps thought upright. The science also learned something it struggled to write plainly, that after certain thresholds, the data become less about perception and more about personhood. Ask someone to report what they see in a blank light for an hour, and you have an experiment. Ask them to endure it for 2 days, and you have a life event whose consequences will not fit in a results table. The wings of our universities are full of rooms that can become such events if vigilance lapses. Vigilance, in this case, is not only a monitor and a bell. It is humility about how quickly a clean method can become a dirty story. There are counterpoints worth holding so we do not slip into hagiography or horror-mongering. Many participants recovered without lasting injury. For some, the experience was merely boring and strange. For some, it was instructive in a way that made them kinder to people who see what others do not. Research protocols now are fenced by oversight committees with sharper teeth. Informed consent has grown the kind of spine that can refuse. Short, controlled periods of reduced input are used therapeutically in contexts where consent is ongoing and escape easy. Flotation tanks, meditation retreats, quiet rooms. These are not the same rooms. The difference is not just duration and dosage, it is the presence of a door you can open yourself. Still, the tape lingers because of what it implies about spaces we do not control. Solitary confinement, even with lights and meals and clean sheets, is a laboratory that continues to run whether or not anyone writes down the results. Long winter, in an outpost with white sky for weeks and radio as company. A neonatal ward before someone convinced the staff that babies need touch as much as calories. An apartment where a person scrolls a glowing rectangle until the rectangle colonizes their sense of day. The mechanisms rhyme even when the ethics do not. If there is a prescription here that does not reduce to scolding, it might be this. Build your days so that your mind has enough to eat. Seek edges, contrast, texture, novelty in doses you can digest. Let your senses change the channel on purpose. Light that is light, music that is music, wind that is not your fan. Do not mistake noise for nourishment. When you choose silence, choose it as an instrument with a score, not as weather that erases the horizon. When you must endure a white room you did not ask for, hospital, waiting period, grief, smuggle meaning in, a voice that answers back, a ritual with endings, a body near yours if a body will come. For the rest of us, the ones who build rooms for a living, labs, offices, wards, cells, hold this tape in your teeth as if it were a live wire. Deprivation is not neutral. It is an intervention with effects you cannot predict beyond the first hour. If the person in your room is there because they said yes, keep asking for that yes as often as the clock allows. If they cannot say yes, Make the room kinder than your protocol requires and kinder than your funders reward. Do not teach yourself to call the hum therapy. What started as a study of perception became a parable about what a human consciousness is. Not a candle in a jar, but a fire that needs air. Remove the air and the fire does not go out. It starts burning the jar. When you break the seal, the flame still remembers. Tape 9, The Summer Camp, Robbers Cave, 1954, Oklahoma. The bus bounces down a gravel road and the boys chant the names of towns they've only seen from ball fields. They are 11, maybe 12, the age when friendship is a secret handshake and rules feel like adventure. The counselors, clean-shaven, khaki, kind, wave as if they have been waiting for these exact faces all summer. No one says the word experiment. They say camp. The first week is sunshine and separation. 2 groups, 2 ends of the park, 2 mess halls, 2 sets of counselors who keep the secret clean. The boys do not know the other group exists. Their world is a circle of cabins and trails and a creek that looks older than anyone there. Each group invents itself by morning. A name, a flag, a way of walking. One picks rattlers, the other eagles. The rattlers make a banner with a snake that looks angrier than any in the grass. The eagles pick blue and white and sew their idea of flight into cloth. Songs appear, then rules, then traditions that feel ancient by the second night. The boys are good at this. Humans are. The counselors watch with clipboards disguised as friendly attention. They put a little extra sugar on moments that bind. Let the boys find the good swimming hole by accident, praise the one who mends a tear in the flag, admire the way someone starts a fire fast. They listen for slogans. They memorize who becomes a captain when no one says the word aloud. One morning, the world widens. The groups are told carefully that there's another set of boys in the park. The information lands with a thrill shaped like a challenge. There is talk of meeting, of playing ball, of making friends. The counselors smile and nod, then announce a tournament. Tug of war. Baseball. Treasure hunts. Points will be kept. A trophy awaits the winners. Medals, pocket knives, bragging rights. Losers get good sportsmanship. The rules are printed neatly on a board that hangs at the mess. At first, the air is ordinary competition. A good catch, a tip of the cap, laughter when someone slips in the dust. Then the current sharpens. The eagles chant. The rattlers answer with a louder chant. The first shove is playful and tests the edge of the word. The second shove is not playful. Names change tint. Those guys becomes those jerks. A missed call becomes a conspiracy. A lost game becomes a story told at dinner about how the other side cheats. The counselors do not pour gasoline. They tilt the can. Scarcity does the work. The trophy sits in the open like a small altar. The knives glint in the sun. The boys begin to guard what is promised to them, as if the promise were already property. The rattlers win a game and plant their flag on the diamond. The eagles respond in the only language that feels adequate. They raid the rattlers' cabin that night, overturn bunks, and leave a note that says the camp belongs to birds. The next day, the rattlers take the eagles' banner, tear it, and set the cloth on fire, a ceremony that blazes and dies before a counselor can say the word stop without sounding like a guest. It is not constant fighting. That is not how boys work. It is a climate that makes small storms. A line is cut in the middle of the mess hall. Salt shakers migrate to one side. A rumor arrives that the other group gets more dessert. Someone trips on a root and blames a kid 3 feet away because the world now contains a cause for every scrape. Stones are thrown near the creek and someone pretends they were aimed. Taunts become uniforms. One boy, timid, homesick since day 2, finds a way to matter by becoming the loudest voice against the other side. Another boy, big, beloved, finds himself acting as the fuse when the counselors ask him to calm things down and tells them he's not their policeman. A counselor suggests a shared campfire to make peace. The boys attend, roast hot dogs, sing, shout, and then leave with the same faces they brought. Contact without purpose is just noise. The counselors try a movie night. Tickets cost pocket change. They engineer scarcity again, inverted. Each group has a little money. Neither has enough. The boys meet under a tree because the math forces them to. They pool crumpled bills and watch a Western together from benches that smell like varnish. For 90 minutes, the world is cowboys and silhouettes. After, the air feels thinner around the insults for an hour. Then, it thickens again. The water taste changes one afternoon. Metallic. Wrong. A counselor announces a problem at the reservoir and needs hands. The boys follow the pipe through brush to a section that hisses where it should hum. Tools appear from nowhere. Someone suggests a spiral of bodies to keep the trench from collapsing. The shovel passes from Rattler to Eagle and back without names attached. When the flow returns, the boys cheer with the unselfconscious joy of people who made a thing work. They drink from canteens and pass them without looking at wristbands. The counselors clap as if the water fixed itself. Another day, the delivery truck sinks into soft ground at the edge of the road. The driver, who is also a counselor, swears like a man who has done this before. A rope appears. The boys take positions like tug of war, except the flag in the middle now is a ton of stuck. It doesn't budge at first. Then someone counts in a rhythm. Both groups accept. On 3, the truck lurches. On 5, it rolls. On 7, the rope falls slack and boys tumble into a pile that feels like a field you would choose to fall on. That night, the chants sound less like war songs and more like bragging about the truck. The tournament ends. The trophy goes to the Rattlers. The Eagles clap with the performative politeness of people who know they will not forget. There is still a wall in the mess, but it has holes. Bus day arrives. The counselors arrange seats so that enemies sit shoulder to shoulder and then sit in the front with clipboards as if taking attendance. As the bus rounds a curve, the boys begin a song. It is not an Eagle song or a Rattler song. It is a song about buses and summer and the future they have been promised but can't quite picture. At a gas station in a small town, one group spends leftover money buying Cokes for the other. As if generosity were a weapon they intend to leave with the counselors, blades sheathed. Later, in rooms with blinds and chalk, the results become phrases that will travel through decades. In-group formation, friction, integration, realistic conflict theory, superordinate goals. The tapes hold something simpler and more dangerous. How quickly a flag becomes a reason. How easily adults smiling can make enemies out of children by hanging knives on a wall and calling it incentive. How contact fails when it's just proximity. How cooperation works when failure harms everyone equally, and success rewards no team alone. Commentary. What happened at the park is both ordinary and staged. Ordinary because humans make tribes when given the thinnest materials: name, song, cloth, promise. Staged because grown men designed the weather, kept the groups apart until identity hardened, erected a scoreboard, stocked the prize case, scheduled collisions. Deception wrapped the method like bark. Parents signed a consent that said camp. Counselors were Confederates. The boys became data without being given the language that dignifies being studied. The lesson that survived the longest is not the cruelty of children, but the power of structure. Hostility did not require bad apples. It required a field with scarce goods. Pointing at character is an alibi when the board in the mess hall is the real author. The smallest manipulations were the sharpest. A trophy on a table, a rumor about dessert, a neighbor's chant allowed to go just a hair longer than is polite. You do not need propaganda if you can set up a tournament and a wall. Equally durable is the lesson about repair. Simple contact is an expensive way to entrench contempt. Sit 2 groups at a shared campfire and they will perform civility around a coal of resentment they take back to bed like a pocket furnace. Give them a truck in a ditch and instruction to pull together or fail together, and recategorization begins, from us versus them to we against this. The superordinate goal phrase is too clean for what the camera shows. Faces that forget to hate because their hands are busy. Bodies that relearn rhythm by feeling the same rope burn. Ethics complicate the triumph. The boys were not told what they were inside of. The study was not built to protect them from the worst of themselves. It was built to evoke that worst and then tame it. Some were frightened, some humiliated, some remade in ways they did not have the vocabulary to describe until much later. There were earlier iterations that did not ignite on schedule. There were whispers and nudges inserted to make sure this one did. Science is not a neutral spectator in this story. It is the playwright and the stagehand both. And yet, the tapes also gift a map for people who inherit divided rooms they did not design. If your school, workplace, town, or dinner table has become robber's cave with email, do not confuse mingling with medicine. Bring them together is the advice of people who like to look at their own virtue. Give them a task that fails without both, is harder to film and more likely to work. The task must be real: fix the water, free the truck, pass the bond, staff the clinic, and it must be structured so that no side can succeed alone and no side can absorb the credit. Status must be equal inside the task. Leadership must be shared. Rules must be seen as fair. And when it works, you must leave something changed in the environment: a road, a schedule, a habit, so the new category survives the next rumor. There is also a smaller, more private instruction the footage teaches if you watch the faces on the bus. Identities feel like destiny until the scenery changes. A boy who could only see enemies 2 days prior shares a bottle without thinking because the bus rewrote the field. No scoreboard, no knives, no counselors with clipboards, no open arena to perform in. This does not mean identity is costume. It means identity is also choreography. Change the dance and different parts of a person find their feet. The criticisms of the study matter. The sampling was narrow. The counselors crossed the line between observation and orchestration. The legends outran the subtleties. The world has seen too many leaders abuse the superordinate goal trick to force unity under bad causes. But weakness in myth does not erase strength in method. You can get from hostility to we without sermon if you design for the right failure and the right success. If you are tempted in your own smaller camp to try a version of what worked there, do not hide your hand. Tell people what you are doing and why. Ask for their consent to be engineered. Let them help design the rope. Keep prizes off tables where they breed suspicion. Reward the process as much as the result. And when someone says, "those guys," ask what problem both groups hate that is bigger than pride. If they cannot name one, build one and make it honest. The boys went home as eagles and rattlers and not eagles and not rattlers, and sons and brothers and kids who had learned a few new chants. Most forgot the names of the men with the clipboards. Some never forgot the feeling of that rope in their hands. On nights when adulthood drew its own walls, a few would remember briefly that enemies are often roles, that roles can be rewritten by jobs that demand hands more than throats. The tapes do not give you a song to sing to banish hate. They give you something stranger and sturdier: a truck in a ditch and a reason that belongs to both. Tape 10, Eye of the Storm, Blue Eyes, Brown Eyes, 1970, Iowa. The bell rings with the ordinary kindness of a Midwestern morning. 20 children settle behind wooden desks worn to a shine by years of small elbows. The room is bright. Construction paper chains, a calendar with a lamb for March, a chalkboard that still remembers yesterday's arithmetic. The teacher moves with that sure, soft speed unique to people who know exactly where everything lives in their room. Her voice is gentle without being fragile. She has written a sentence on the board: "Today we are going to learn about discrimination." She asks them if they know what the word means. Hands jump, ideas spill, unfairness, teasing, meanness. The thing grown-ups say when they talk about the news. She nods. Then she does something that turns the air into a wire. She divides them by eye color. Blue eyes to one side of the room, brown eyes to the other. The children stand with the cheerful confusion of a game they don't yet understand. She passes out collars, stiff cardboard rings the color of oatmeal, and buckles them around the necks of the brown-eyed children. The blue-eyed children watch, eyebrows lifted, not sure whether to be amused or afraid. The teacher's voice changes. It does not grow louder. It simply acquires an authority that feels like a door closing. "Today," she says, "blue-eyed children are smarter, cleaner, better. They get 5 extra minutes of recess. They get seconds at lunch. They go first in line. Brown-eyed children will have to use the paper cups at the fountain. Brown-eyed children will not be allowed on the playground equipment. Brown-eyed children must sit in the back." A boy with brown eyes laughs as if to drain the room of tension. The collar rubs his skin when he swallows. The teacher looks at him the way you look at a dog that's about to run into the street. "Brown-eyed children," she says, "have been known to be careless. They cannot be trusted." She says it slowly enough to lay track. The new rules proliferate with the elegant cruelty of bureaucracy. Blue-eyed children are told they may correct brown-eyed children if they misread. Brown-eyed children must ask permission to sharpen pencils. Blue eyes get the ball first. Brown eyes stand aside. At first, the room is performance. The blue-eyed children enjoy the new posture, The way children enjoy a costume on Halloween. It makes them taller, briefly. But within an hour, the performance is no longer a performance. A blue-eyed boy corrects a brown-eyed friend with a voice 1 octave lower than his morning voice. 2 girls who ate lunch together yesterday now eat apart because one has noticed the other's collar. A brown-eyed girl stumbles on flashcards she had mastered the day before. Her lips dry out, her eyes look glassy and old. At recess, the camera watches a blue-eyed boy deny a swing to a brown-eyed boy who has always been faster, funnier, second base on both teams. Because Mrs. said, he says, and kicks the dirt to mark his line. On the playground, the new rule travels faster than sneakers. A shove appears and dissipates. A boy who has never hit anyone hits someone. The teacher breaks them apart with a voice that holds the whole room together by its spine. When they return inside, the brown-eyed children walk as if their shoes have gained weight. The teacher brings out reading cards, a list of words to be named and timed. The blue-eyed children set records. They grin with the relief of doing well under a sky that wants them. The brown-eyed children falter on words they could juggle yesterday. Some stare at the cards like a test they were not warned about. Some race and trip over letters that now feel like marbles in their mouths. The teacher notes the times on a chart with neat check marks. The numbers will look like science when the bell rings. One brown-eyed boy raises his hand to object, argue the fairness of a world that changed on a teacher's sentence. He uses but and always and yesterday. The teacher says, "You're being difficult." The room hears the phrase as if she had stamped it into wet cement. The boy of yesterday becomes the boy who is difficult. You can watch the collar tighten, even if it doesn't. By afternoon, the children have learned to divide their eyes from their friendships. A blue-eyed child tells the camera with sincere authority that brown-eyed children get things wrong more often, that they are messy, that they forget. A brown-eyed child tells the camera that blue-eyed children boss too much, that their heads are big, that they don't share. These are not reasons. They are myths in real time. They are the stories tribes tell to keep the map simple. The second day arrives with a reversal. The teacher removes the collars from brown eyes and buckles them around blue. Her voice contains no apology. "We learned yesterday that brown-eyed children are better," she says. "Today we will learn the truth. Brown-eyed children are not better. Blue-eyed children are not better. But today, for the purposes of our lesson, brown eyes will be on top." The relief that floods the newly uncollared is not justice, it is oxygen. They stand taller than they stood yesterday. They laugh with a certain edge. The newly collared blue-eyed children look around as if furniture has moved while they slept. They stumble on words they owned 24 hours before. One cries because the crying is older than this classroom. A brown-eyed boy who ate humiliation for lunch yesterday eats power for breakfast today and discovers it has the same calories. He corrects, he mocks, he pushes. The room is teaching him what to do with a lever when someone puts it in his hand. In less than 48 hours, the experiment has condensed the sociology into a second grade. Performance metrics shift with status. Kindness thins when you feed it superiority. Contempt learns fast. Shame learns faster. The footage is unbearable in its ordinariness. No one shouts slurs. No one needs to. The collars do the speaking. The teacher's calm is the metronome. At the end, she gathers them and asks what they learned. A brown-eyed girl says, "When we had the collars, we felt better than them, and when they had the collars, they felt better than us, and we didn't like them, and they didn't like us." A blue-eyed boy says, "You can't judge a person by the color of their eyes." Another child, too small for moral language, says, "It wasn't fair." The teacher nods and tells them, "You are all the same." She means it. The children look relieved and stunned as if coming out of anesthesia. Commentary. The tape is often described as a lesson about prejudice. It is more precise than that. It is a lesson about how quickly structure writes itself into souls. The collars are not metaphors. They are technologies. The teacher's rules are not suggestions. They are laws that alter cognition, mood, and memory. When the room divides, the children's performance changes not because their abilities change, but because the weather in their heads does. This is stereotype threat in miniature. Expectations become air. Air becomes blood. Blood becomes outcomes. Ethically, the tape refuses easy filing. Some say it is a necessary wound, short, reversible, instructive. Others will say the wound is not mild. You can hear it in the way a child's laugh thins when asked to play foreman, in the way another child's shoulders round when asked to play less than. The lesson works. That is its defense and its indictment. It is important to say what the tape does not show. It does not show consent, as we use the word now. It does not show parents given a menu of harms and asking their children if they wish to taste any. It does not show debrief structured with the same care as the lesson across weeks, with follow-up when nightmares occur or when a child decides he likes power too much to let it go. It is also important to say what the tape does show with heartbreaking clarity. Systems change people faster than people change systems. Move a rule and you move a child. Change a privilege and you change a test score. The myth that we carry virtues like talismans that ward off structures is a fairy tale we tell because we prefer to believe ourselves sovereign. The room in this tape is the author. The teacher is its pen. Critiques in later years matter. Some adult workshops using this method turned into theater of humiliation rather than education, substituting catharsis for policy. Corporate trainings borrowed the format without the context and called it enlightenment. The original lesson is not a vaccine. It is a demonstration. Vaccines are chemistry. Demonstrations are cinema. What inoculates is not a collar for 2 days, but the design of rules, budgets, and practices that make the collars unnecessary. What endures usefully from the tape is a small set of instructions you can apply without collars. If you are a teacher, coach, manager, parent, design your room as if eye color lives everywhere in subtler forms. Accents, zip codes, clothing, diagnoses, last names. Do not pretend the room is neutral. Make the rules visible, negotiable, and fair. Rotate privileges with logic. Publish criteria. De-randomize praise. Refuse to let a single stumble become a lifetime's label. If you are a person inside a room that feels suddenly cold for reasons you can't quite name, inventory the collars. Who has extra recess? Who drinks from the fountain? Who gets paper cups? Who is asked to prove twice what others are given once? You are not paranoid if you notice patterns. You are awake. And if you want to replicate the lesson, consider that horror is not the only teacher. You can demonstrate the effect of structure by building structures that heal and watching performance climb. Film that. It will not sell as many workshops. It will change more lives. The tape's most indelible images are not the collars. They are the faces of children rediscovering each other at the end, moving toward the same water fountain as if the metal could forgive. The forgiveness is not permanent. It is practice. They will need it in rooms where the teacher is not kind, where the collars are invisible, and where the rules are voted on in meetings they are not invited to attend. The forbidden part of this tape is not that it is hidden. It is that it shows how little it takes to change us, and how much it matters who writes the rules on the board before the bell rings. Tape 11, The Still Face, 1975 plus, Tronick. The room is simple on purpose. A small table, 2 chairs turned toward each other, a high chair with a tray, a camera that forgets to blink. The fluorescent light is flat and honest. A mother sits close, knees almost touching the chair legs, her baby upright in the high chair, chest strapped, hands free, eyes huge. On the table, a rattle, a soft block, a cloth ring. The door clicks shut and the world reduces to face and face. First, ordinary life. The mother leans in and sings a nothing song made of vowels and breath. The baby answers with the grammar all babies know. Brows up, mouth open into an O, a kick that looks like punctuation. She hides her face behind her hands, peeks, says, boo, and the baby detonates in a laugh that shakes his shoulders. He pounds the tray, pushes the rattle toward her, offers and withdraws and offers again, pure negotiation. Serve and return, like tennis, except every point is love. Then the signal, silent to us, clear to her. She turns back with a face she has rehearsed, still neutral, a polite mask emptied of warmth. No smile, no tilt that says, I see you. The baby recognizes her and does not recognize her, a paradox that hits his body first. He tries the obvious. Leans forward, flares his nostrils, widens his eyes as if to make his face big enough to pull her back. He squeals, a bright ribbon of sound. He presents the rattle again, more emphatic. Look, it's the thing we pass between us when we're us. Her face holds. He escalates. Coo becomes chatter. Chatter becomes sharp syllables. The syllables stack into a protest he has never been taught and has always known. Both arms lift in a V and splay their fingers, the primitive pick-me-up that predates words. His legs pump. His lips compress, then tremble, then reach. His entire body becomes an arrow pointed at her missing responsiveness. Her face holds. Seconds stretch like hours in a nervous system that measures time by replies. He tries proximity without movement, freezes, eyes fixed, mouth searching for a shape that will unlock her. Then he tries trickery, a quick smile, the social magic key. When it doesn't turn the lock, his smile collapses mid-bloom in a way that hurts to watch. He tries touching his own face, tries tongues and raspberries, tries tapping the tray in perfect staccato to wake her. Her face holds. Now his physiology climbs the hill. Breath quickens, cheeks flush, pupils widen. He makes the keening sound of a siren scaled to 12 pounds. He arches away and then toward. He drops his gaze and then drags it back to her as if looking away might erase her, and he cannot risk it. He self-soothes, thumb to mouth, a ragged clutch of his own hair, a rhythmic rock that belongs to mammals, left too long without answer. This buys seconds, not safety. He slaps the tray with the open palm of someone who has discovered anger and cannot name it. Her face holds. Some babies negotiate longer, some fold early. This one switches to the last strategy, despair. He turns his head to the side as if refusing to endorse the room. Shoulders slump, the orchestra of motion falls apart. His hand, still gripping the rattle, drops. The toy thuds without being noticed. The documentary voiceovers will later call this disorganization. But here you can see something simpler. A bid that has given up on being a bid. And then it's over. She moves, just a fraction, but it's thunder. Her eyebrows lift and her mouth softens around the sound of "oh," and the baby explodes with grief and relief at once. He screams as if to empty the tax the last minute took, then lunges toward her with both arms, shaking with fury and love. She coos apologies without words, her face flooding with warmth, hands fluttering reassurance. He pounds her chest as if scolding, then collapses under her chin as if fainting from the effort of returning. They repair. That's the most important part. The air slowly finds its normal composition again. He hiccups, then smiles through the hiccup. She mirrors, exaggerated and true. The game of boo returns, tentative and then sure. The rattle re-enters the plot as a prop instead of a life raft. Somewhere, a pulse rate drops. Somewhere else, cortisol starts walking back down the stairs. Another dyad, another room. Another mother who goes flat the way only a loving face can go flat, painfully neutral. Another baby who tries bribery, comedy, negotiation, and prayer. One child squeals with outrage immediately. Another pulls into quiet like a turtle. One goes to his thumb within 2 seconds. One refuses the thumb because it would be admitting loss. The specifics change. The arc is the same. Bid, escalate, protest, soothe, despair, reunion, repair. Commentary. This tape is not about cruelty. It is about contingency. A young human nervous system expects, needs its signals to register somewhere. The face across from it is a mirror, thermostat, compass, translator. When the mirror goes blank, the thermostat breaks, the compass spins, the translator drops the phone. Panic is not a story, it is reflex. Serve and return is not a metaphor. It is a calibration loop that writes itself into synapses. What you see in 2 minutes is the architecture of attachment in high speed. The baby tests, are you there? Am I seen? Do my signals matter? When a caregiver's face answers faithfully most of the time, the infant stores a map. The world is predictable enough and I have an effect. When the answers are delayed, diluted, erratic, or chronically absent, the map skews. The world is unsafe, or I am ineffective, or both. Those maps don't stay in the nursery. They become the defaults your adult body reaches for when the lover goes quiet, the boss stares through you, the room forgets you on purpose. Protest, despair, detachment is not melodrama. It's a sequence learned before words. The still face also demonstrates something that isn't cynical at all. Rupture is inevitable and repair is medicine. No pair is perfectly contingent. Caregivers get tired, phones intrude, grief flattens a face, illness shortens a fuse. The lesson isn't never go still. It's don't stay there, and when you come back all the way. The babies who cry hardest often melt fastest once reconnection is real. What injures is not the blip, but the pattern. A nervous system can metabolize interruption. It cannot thrive under chronic indifference. Ethically, this one looks gentle next to the others. Sessions are brief, a clinician hovers. The instant re-engagement is part of the design, not an afterthought. But gentle doesn't mean trivial. 2 minutes here can feel like an hour inside a chest that doesn't tell time yet. The method is justified because it reveals a universal truth with minimal reversible stress, and because reunion is guaranteed. That last clause is the hinge. Guaranteed reunion. Without it, the still face stops being a method and becomes a story some of us already lived too many times. The science is plain and deep. Contingent interaction, microsecond timing, matching and mismatching expressive choreography is fertilizer for development. It scaffolds attention, language, self-regulation. It tunes the stress system. Your hypothalamus learns what counts as catastrophe by watching whether your cries move a face. It shapes implicit expectations, the pre-verbal convictions about whether reaching works. None of this is destiny. Brains remain plastic, but first drafts matter. It's easy to weaponize this knowledge against parents. Don't. The point is not to indict ordinary flatness. It is to name chronic absence. A parent with depression whose face dims like winter isn't choosing a still face. A parent on a shift who steals 3 minutes between orders isn't abandoning a child. Blame doesn't help. Support does. The tape argues for postpartum care that includes mood as a vital sign, for policies that buy caregivers time to be present, for communities that answer babies when a face can't. And the adult translation, we are still running still face episodes on one another, often by accident. Phubbing is a lab condition in the wild. Your eyes drop to the glow. The person across from you escalates bids, then protests, then sinks into the quiet that looks like acceptance and is actually distance. Ghosting is the extended protocol. The reunion never comes. Stonewalling in conflict is the still face weaponized. And repair, naming it, apologizing for the vacuum, re-engaging with your whole face is the same cure scaled up. The tape doesn't answer everything. It doesn't predict destiny, doesn't map cleanly onto neurodivergence, doesn't decide culture's role in display rules. It shows a core mammalian law and asks you to honor it without making it a cudgel. If you care for a small human, narrate their world, match their affect, let your face be a soft mirror. When you miss a bid, say you missed and try again. They learn 2 lessons at once, that people fail you and that people come back. If you love adults, look up. Warm your eyes before you warm the air with words. When you go still, warn them. When you return, return all the way. The last seconds of a good still face tape are the only kind worth replaying. A baby, red-eyed and wet, suddenly floods with relief when the face returns. A mother takes the tiny hands she just watched flail and kisses their palms. Both laugh, not because anything is funny, but because the nervous system has a laugh it uses when danger downgrades to home. The camera keeps rolling long enough to prove the repair is real. Then the door opens. The world returns. The lesson stays. Tape 12, Separated, the NEUBAUER twin triplet study, 1960s-70s NYC. The office is painted the color of waiting rooms, soft green that refuses to have an opinion. A camera stands on a tripod behind a one-way mirror. Its red light is a pinprick in the glass. On the rug, blocks, a pegboard with colored dowels, a toy piano missing its high C. A woman signs a clipboard, writes her son's name and today's date in careful teacher handwriting, and is thanked for participating in a long-term child development study. The phrase feels modern, hopeful, helpful. Her boy is 3, small enough to be lifted into the little chair without complaint. The examiner wears a tie and a neutral smile. "Can you make a tower?" he asks, sliding the blocks forward. The boy stacks 2, 3, 4, tongue between his teeth. The tower leans and survives. The examiner notes something on a sheet clipped to a board. The mother laughs softly at her son's victory and catches herself because she has been asked to remain quiet. Behind the glass, a second man murmurs into a microphone, time-stamping the session. Test the letter names, the animal sounds, the way his fingers meet the page when he is handed a crayon and told, "Draw a person." They count how long he watches the examiner's eyes when the examiner suddenly looks away. They watch his frustration when a jar is closed too tightly and then watch it disappear. The instant someone says, "Try again." At the end, the boy is allowed to choose a sticker for his bravery. He picks the yellow star because it looks like a thing that knows where it is going. The mother is led down the hall to a small room with 2 chairs and a camera pointed not at her but at the space between them. A woman asks about sleep, about tantrums, about whether he was left or right-handed at the spoon this week, whether he clings, whether he explores, whether he does both, and in what ratio. Any family history of mental illness? Any allergies? The mother answers dutifully, flattered that anyone cares enough to ask so many questions. These visits help us understand children better, the interviewer says with a kind smile. The mother nods as if they have given her something instead of taken something from her she can't yet name. A year later, they return. The boy is taller, quick with the puzzle where the shapes must match the holes, slower with the one where the pieces lie. He scowls when he fails, and then brightens as if a cloud slid off the window. The examiner says, "Show me how you jump," and he jumps, 1 and 2, not quite leaving the ground. Behind the glass, a pen clicks in a rhythm the boy does not hear. The mother brings a different hair, a different worry, the same answer to the question, "Any changes at home?" "No, we're fine." Over the years, the administrators change. The clipboards do not. The questions do not. Across town, at an address with a different doorman and a different view, another boy is placed before the same pegboard and asked to draw the same person, and to jump, and to stack, and to talk to an examiner who smiles the same polite smile. The camera writes the same thin lines on the tape. The mother at this address signs her name on the line that asks for parent guardian, and is told that these sessions are routine checkups by a university clinic that follows adopted children to make sure they're thriving. She is asked whether she ever wonders about nature versus nurture, and laughs, because of course she does, because everyone in her circle does these days. Down in a file room, the reels are labeled with codes instead of names and shelved in boxes whose cardboard edges are soft from hands. Notes are typed and carbon copied and filed under an institutional letterhead that looks like safety. The summaries read cleanly. Subject X at 36 months, compliant, alert, slight speech delay noted, strong gross motor, attachment behaviors within normative range. The reports go to people whose names will be blacked out decades later. The tapes stay. In some homes, the visits include a stranger with a notebook sitting on the floor during dinner, watching how peas move across plates, and whether a child asks before leaving the table, and whether the asking has a plea in it or a confidence. "We're just observing a typical evening," the stranger says, and the mother hides the good silver because she does not like being watched. She does not know that in another apartment, 3 subway stops away, another family is cutting the meatloaf and telling a boy to use his fork correctly, while a different stranger writes, "Parent speaks firmly, child responds, laughter present." At school age, the battery expands. Maze tracing, block patterns, pictures to put in story order, a test with nonsense words pronounced like real ones. Occasionally, a new face shows up with a movie camera and a boom mic. The sessions feel important on those days. The boy sits straighter. The mother wears a nicer blouse. The examiner pretends not to notice the camera. The boy meets the lens as if it were a friend. He does not know that some afternoons he says the same sentence, "I don't like the dog," with the same frown at nearly the same minute as a boy he has never met. He does not know that both boys tilt the same shoulder when asked to catch a ball. Both hesitate a beat before left turns in mazes, that both prefer twice as many raisins as their peers and tell the examiner so with the same conspiratorial smile. He does not know that the experimenters smile privately too and underline the word concordance. In adolescence, the visits thin. The mother wonders whether the study lost funding or interest. The boy learns to ride the subway alone. The world widens into angular halls and lockers. A new friend at a community college looks like a coin struck with the same die. The resemblance starts a rumor that becomes a phone call, that becomes a drive in the rain, that becomes 2 boys standing in front of each other laughing and swearing because they cannot think of a better prayer. There is a third, someone says. The paper runs the story. A third boy appears like an echo with a backpack and an identical birth date. 3 bodies in a room, same hands, same laugh, same posture, knitted across 3 different houses. They eat the same food, smoke the same brand, flirt the same. They are startled by the sameness and then lean into it, the way any young men would when handed a story they can share with strangers at bars. A producer buys them suits and puts them on a set with mugs of coffee. The lights are flattering. The host tells them they are miracles with human faces. They tell the story of the phone call and the drive and the mirror that breathed back. They do not tell the stories they have not yet discovered, because those stories are filed under numbers and are not theirs to know. The adoptive parents meet at a long table with men whose job is to apologize without admitting fault. We never told you about the siblings because we believed twins would do better separated, someone says. It was standard at the time, someone says. You consented to routine evaluations, someone says, as if a phrase on a form meant a forever yes to a world with its glass set to one way. The parents ask why no one thought to tell them there was more of their child somewhere else, why the visits had the smell of secrecy in them, why the words routine and evaluation were allowed to cover up a study. The answers do not change shape. They are as smooth as the names on the letterhead. The parents go home angrier than they have been since their children arrived. Years pass beside work and love and the always complicated business of being the same and not. They open a restaurant and close it. They share apartments and go their separate ways. They fight and forgive. They perform their sameness for others until performance rubs skin raw. One of the three does not survive that friction. The other two age quietly into men who do not laugh easily on camera anymore. Much later, a door opens at a library where rules are whispered. A staffer carries out boxes marked with numbers and warnings. Restricted, redacted, read in this room only. Materials from a study sealed for a lifetime. Inside are pages with names removed and dates intact, with pencils that pressed harder when a child fussed, with block diagrams and home visit summaries and phrases like mother appeared anxious, father talkative. There are reels that can be watched only under supervision, with staff hovering, with time slots, with forms that say what you may not photograph or copy. A man who now knows the name of his brothers watches a video of a small boy saying, "I don't like the dog," into a camera and does not know if he is watching himself, because memory is an unreliable projector and because his boy self and another boy were the same shape. He cries anyway, and the librarian keeps her eyes on the desk because a reading room is a kind of church. The separation of identical siblings was not a natural accident. It was a decision dressed as policy, wrapped inside a study that called itself science. The justification wandered between the pragmatic and the experimental. Families would be more likely to adopt singles than pairs. Siblings might compete. Good data requires variance. So place the children with parents of different ages, incomes, educations, then visit, observe, film, and watch nature and nurture write or erase each other line by line. The parents were told they were part of follow-up that would help children like theirs. They were not told their children had twins. The tapes, when they are allowed to be seen, are almost offensively ordinary. A boy stacking blocks, a girl naming pictures, a mother answering no when asked about nightmares. Their ordinariness is the point. This is how secrecy polishes itself, by making the method look like care and the observation look like love. The harm is not in the pegs, it is in the purpose and the hiding. What did the study learn? The papers that would have told us were never published in the way a field recognizes as publication. Fragments leaked into conference talks and reports. The rest sits in boxes whose access is rationed by time and policy. Families pieced together what they could from librarians' kindness, from redacted pages that still had enough grammar to wound, from news articles written by people who saw a story and tried to make a sentence out of what should have been a reckoning. What we learned anyway came from the men themselves when they met, that biology breathes through strangers, that certain gestures and appetites repeat with eerie confidence across separate houses, that sameness does not cancel pain, that a study design can turn a life into an instrument and break the instrument by playing it too long. We learned that adoption is not a variable, it is a family. We learned that you can change a child's fate by writing a line on a form. Separate, inform, do not inform. We learned that a camera can capture a milestone and also betray one. Defenses still circulate. Separation was the norm, some say. The agency placed children according to the capacity of families, not to serve research. The clinicians believed, genuinely, that their study might answer a question that mattered beyond any single life. what is inherited and what can be shaped. The era lacked our clarity. Consent wore different clothes. These sentences are historically interesting and morally insufficient. Secrecy removes the right to weigh costs. The study did not ask the people it used if they wished to be used. It is tempting to flatten this into a parable about evil men in white coats. Real life is messier. There are thousands of flourishes of care in those tapes. There are questioners who were kind. There are families who did their best with the information they were given. Mess does not absolve. It simply reminds you that harm is often made not of malice, but of confidence coupled to power. If you come to this story looking for a verdict on nature versus nurture, you will leave with a different lesson. That some questions are not worth answering at any price. That resolving a debate can cost more than living with uncertainty. That science without consent is not discovery, it is extraction. That sealing records for a lifetime is not protection, it is perpetuation. There are uses for this tape that do not end in despair. Adoption practice changed. Multiples are rarely split, and if they must be, families are informed and supported. Ethics committees can now veto charisma. Longitudinal work still happens, but must be built on true yeses and on the knowledge that a child is not raw material. You can, today, design studies that respect the people in them, release data without requiring grief to open the box, and still answer good questions. There is also the private non-policy work the tape demands, honoring the fact that for some people, the floor of their life lies over a trapdoor someone else installed. If you know them, let them name what was taken and what was left. Do not tell them the question was worth their biography. Do not tell them the good that came after proves the good of what came before. The last image worth keeping is not of boys reunited on television, then not manic with the relief of finding their own faces. It is of an adult, centuries older in the space of a second, sitting in a quiet room with a librarian nearby, watching a small child perform a task and feeling his ribcage close around a truth. That what he is seeing is not just data, but history, and that some histories only exist because a camera was pointed at the wrong thing. Tape 14, Remote Control DELGADO'S STIMOCEIVER, 1963-65, Spain, Yale. The arena is the color of heat. Afternoon presses down like a hand. In the ring, a bull lowers its head until the sun disappears behind a crescent horn. On the far side, a man steps through the gate, dressed not as a matador but as a clinician. Tie, sleeves rolled. A small box in one hand, with an antenna no longer than a finger. The crowd is here for a rumor, that today the animal will be stopped not by cape or blade, but by radio. The bull charges the way thunder arrives, first a tremor, then the world leaning, then velocity turned into sound. The man does not run. He faces the animal and lifts his hand the way one introduces a trick. The box clicks. The bull slams to a halt so hard its hooves draw a line in dust. It shakes its head in confusion, pawing at the ground as if the dirt were the problem. Another pass. Another click. This time, the bull veers left, as if remembering a different appointment. The crowd lifts into a single astonished vowel. The man in the ring lowers the device and breathes like someone who has just finished walking a very thin path. Later, he will explain that wires thread from a small receiver buried under the animal's skull to needles in its brain, and that pressing the switch floods a cluster of cells with current. He will call it electrical stimulation of the caudate nucleus. The papers will call it something else, remote control. Back in a hospital room far from dust and heat, a young man sits with a scarf tied around his head to hide the metal that now lives under his skin. A reel-to-reel recorder turns its lazy circles. On the bedside table, another small box with an antenna. He has a history, the chart says. Rage, despair, a body that does not always answer to its owner. The physician at his side speaks a cadence of reassurance. I'm going to press a button, the doctor says. You may feel something pleasant. Click. The young man blinks, then smiles as if the room has said his name in the exact right way. It's nice, he says, embarrassed by the inadequacy of the word. His shoulders loosen. He sits back as if the bed has gotten softer. Now this one. Click. Click. A wince. Hands rise to the chest. He frowns at an invisible ache. Please, he says, without knowing what he is asking for. Another. Click. His head turns as if a sound has called him from the corner. His right arm rises from the bed, elbow locking. I didn't do that, he says, alarmed and fascinated in equal measure. It did it. Again. Click. Laughter bubbles from him, full and uninvited, a laugh with no joke behind it, then tears. Then a flash of a snarl so brief it embarrasses them both. I'm sorry, he says. I'm not angry. The doctor notes euphoria, sadness, aggression, motor response in tidy columns. The device makes the column possible. In another session, a woman sits facing a mirror. A current touches a specific point, and dread blooms so fast her hands move to shield a body that is not under threat. I feel like something terrible is about to happen, she says, and the voice that says it is the voice a person uses when fear has already found its seat. The current ceases, the air clears. Repeat. Another electrode, another feeling. Wariness without cause, an urge to talk that surprises her with its speed, a certainty that someone in the hall has just called her name. The STIMOCEIVER. The coinage is as clean and confident as the device, allows wires implanted in cortex and deeper structures to be activated by radio. No tether, no technician leaning over the bed with leads. Mobility, and with it, a new theater. A subject can be sent walking down a corridor while someone in the next room dials neurons like stations. You could make a hand rise, a head turn, a pace quicken. Not puppetry in the Baroque sense, no choreography of complex acts, but something close to the fracture where will ends and body begins. A journalist is invited to see. The physician places the control box in the reporter's palm and instructs, press here. Before the reporter refuses, he feels the small, unholy thrill of proximity to a lever that seems to lower the cost of moving another human. He says no. The physician presses instead. The subject's hand leaps like a fish on a line. The lab writes the results with the zeal of pioneers. Movement can be initiated. Affect can be colored, violence can be provoked and then pacified. Animals can be stopped mid-charge. Humans can be guided away from cliff edges of mood. A book will follow, bold to the point of prophecy. A psycho-civilized society in which neurosurgery and stimulation rescue humans from their cruelty to themselves and each other. Behind the rhetoric stands a vision both utopian and authoritarian. If we can quiet the parts of the brain that misbehave, perhaps we can civilize the species by voltage. Between sessions, the words return to their ordinary weather. Cigarettes, murmured gossip, the smell of disinfectants sliding under doorways. Patients with bandages and hair parted around implants shuffle to the cafeteria like soldiers who have been sent to the future and returned with radios in their heads. Some are calmer, some are less. Some feel tricked by their own laughter. One describes an emptiness that arrived the day the device was removed, as if a room he hated losing had nonetheless been a room. Commentary. The ring in the ward turned a technical point into a legend, that the brain is a switchboard, and that with the right map and the right finger you can switch a person on and off. In truth, the STIMOCEIVER proved something both more modest and more frightening. Modest because stimulation rarely authored complex behavior. It biased systems, nudged a limb, tinted a feeling, surged attention toward or away. A pressed button did not write a sentence, it added an adjective. It was not possession. It was suggestion with wiring. Frightening because suggestion delivered as compulsion dissolves agency from the inside. When a hand rises by itself, the self has to negotiate what itself means. When an emotion blooms without context, the mind backfills reasons, invents stories that make it less terrible to be moved by a ghost. You watch the subject in the bed apologize for anger he didn't choose, and you understand that what is at stake is not only control, but dignity, the ability to believe that your feelings are yours. The ethical ledger is complicated in the same way as every tape that traveled across the border between clinic and spectacle. Some of the human work was done with consent, as the era understood consent. Some subjects reported relief, depression lifted where words had failed, rages interrupted before they wrecked rooms and lives, mania tempered, tremors quieted. The bull was saved from a sword that day. Much of modern neuromodulation owes a debt to this electric boldness. Deep brain stimulation for Parkinson's disease and dystonia, for severe OCD and some depressions, responsive neurostimulation for epilepsy, even non-invasive tools like TMS. Electricity, given with care, is medicine. But meshed with that truth is another. Vulnerability concentrated in psychiatric wards meets charisma concentrated in ambitious labs, and the result can be research that treats people like proofs. The patients who said yes were not voting in a parliament of equals. The promise of being made better makes any lever look like a lifeline. The bull did not consent at all. The public demonstration was less about animal welfare than about theater. The book about a psychocivilized society reads now as a warning of how easily one can slip from cure into control, from help into governance. There are also scientific limits worth holding, like guardrails. Buttons can raise arms. They cannot make symphonies of movement. Stimulation can elicit fear. It cannot author a grudge. Complex acts require loops across the brain, scaffolded by memory and meaning. The dream of a remote that orders a human like a television is a dream that mistakes a chord for a choir. When you hear anyone selling you total control of the mind, whether with electricity, chemicals, or slogans, check the wiring in their argument. It will be missing a ground. Still, nothing here lets us be complacent. We live in a century that has refined levers. Electrodes are finer, targets are mapped in living color, wearable headsets read motor intent, invasive arrays translate cortex whispers into text, closed-loop devices learn a person's rhythms and answer back. Most of this is done with consent that is no longer a sketch. And yet the old temptations survive with new branding. Security agencies sniff around labs. Enhancement replaces treatment in grant titles. Startups pitch attention shaping as productivity rather than compliance. The line between help and handle is thin. What to take from the ring and the word that does not curdle into paranoia or naivete. First, that causality flows through meat. Consciousness is not a ghost above the brain. It is a pattern in it. Press here and a hand rises. Touch there and dread floods. This does not reduce us to machinery. It reminds us that our mystery is wired, and wires can be honored or abused. Second, that consent is not merely a signature. It is a relationship. Who asks, who answers, who benefits, who can stop the device. These determine whether electricity is therapy or coercion. If a patient cannot say no today, you are borrowing tomorrow's regret to power today's paper. Third, that public theater seduces science. The bull ring persuaded a world in an afternoon that a future had arrived. Futures do not arrive. They are built patient layer by patient layer with setbacks and side effects and boring data that never makes the papers, the boring data. The non-boring data is where safety lives. Fourth, that agency survives nudges. The subject whose arm lifted like a puppet's still chose every sentence that followed. After the shock, he could ask for it to stop. After the smile, he could say the smile wasn't his. We are not as fragile as the myth of mind control requires us to be. The very unease the tape produces is proof. Our sense of self objects to being moved. It is an alarm worth preserving. If you need an image to hold, let it be this. A hand hovers above a button, and a face, yours, mine, a patient's, a bull's, waits on the other end of a wire. The choice is never only whether the button works. It is whether the hand holding the box can be trusted, whether the face on the other side has agreed to be moved, whether we can stand in arenas built for spectacle and decline to press for applause. The STIMOCEIVER made a promise it could not keep, to civilize us by force. The better promise is humbler, to use what electricity can do to reduce suffering without reducing people to circuits, to build a society not psycho-civilized, but consented, where the most astonishing thing a button can do is turn itself off when the person it touches says enough.